Un. I dare say your bed and breakfast would make the perfect setting for a murder mystery, Rosalie Weston said, spinning in a slow circle as she admired the main floor of the Keys bed and breakfast in Key West, Florida. Why, thank you, Eva Stewart said with a barely contained laugh. If only the woman knew how right she was. A dead body had been found in one of the rooms only a few months ago, but that murder had been solved and all had been quiet since then. As the owner of the Keys, Eva certainly hoped the peaceful trend continued. It's simply charming, don't get me wrong, Rosalie said, and I like the beachy Christmas decor you have. It reminds me of a movie I did in the 80s. Eva smiled. Rosalie had been a popular film star during the late 60s and had recently landed a few more current notable roles. It was fun to have a famous person staying at her B&B. Would you like to see your room? I was wondering if I might see the space we discussed first. Eva had hoped the woman might not ask right away, but she smiled anyway and directed her to follow her to the elevator. While Eva was accustomed to guests requesting certain things, she'd been taken off guard by Rosalie's request for a meeting space. Eva had considered turning the woman down, but then she'd mentioned why she wanted it, and Eva had caved. They entered the narrow elevator, and Eva pressed the mostly unused button to the 3rd floor. You do realize it's not finished. Oh, dear, you don't have to convince me. I'm fine being rustic, and I'm assuming Mary won't mind either. The familiarity with which Rosalie said the woman's name made Eva's heart soar, and she had a strange moment of feeling practically giddy. To think Mary Grant was coming to her bed and breakfast. Ah, here we are. The door opened, and Rosalie stepped out with a dramatic flair that somehow suited her. Ah, this is lovely. Eva felt the woman was being overly kind, but she looked at the space through her eyes. It was the attic of the Victorian home that she was slowly renovating, which meant steeply slanted walls with a few dormer pop-outs. Behind the elevator was drywall, but she'd managed to divert her contractor Ruben to the attic before the women arrived in order to finish off a few of the more important aspects of the space. The ceiling had been finished and painted merely days before, and her newest employee, Sarah Fisk, had helped her decorate the space. There was a king bed on the far wall, separated by an elegant Chinese screen, and a sitting area opposite, with a full couch, 2 wing-backed chairs, and a coffee table. Situated in one of the dormers was a lovely antique desk. It had been a pain to haul up to the 3rd story, but seeing it in the space now, she knew it had all been worth it. It's perfect, Rosalie said, turning to Eva with clasped hands. I know you rushed to get this done for us, but I think Mary will be pleased. So, I must know, Eva said, her heart pounding. How do you know Mary Grant? I mean, from what I hear, she's very private. Rosalie laughed, and Eva couldn't tell if it were practiced or genuine. You could never tell with actors. I don't know her at all. She reached out to me, actually. Said she thought my life story was worth telling. I couldn't argue with her, Rosalie said with another laugh. So I said yes. Eva had read every single one of Mary Grant's memoirs. They were known for featuring bold women in impossible circumstances, which is what made this whole arrangement seem odd to Eva. From what she could tell of Rosalie's background, there wasn't anything shocking like the other memoir stories Mary had written. Then again, Eva had gotten her background information on Rosalie from the internet, and who knew how accurate that was. That's very exciting. It is, Rosalie said, walking around the space again and trailing a hand along the back side of the couch as if she were a star in a black-and-white movie. I think I'll stay up here until Mary arrives. Will that do? Yes, here. Eva rustled in her pockets for the key cards. This is to your room, and this card is for this room. You're on the 2nd floor in the yellow room, one of my favorites. I'm sure it's lovely. Just have my luggage sent up. The woman snatched the cards and slid them into her pocket, then went to sit at the desk as if to look out the window. Eva pursed her lips and headed back to the elevator. There was no one else working in housekeeping that day, since Benita, her house manager, was sick, and Elena had already finished her cleaning. That left Eva to handle the luggage. She didn't mind, though. Getting her hands dirty, so to speak, was what reminded her of what her staff did and how thankful she was to have them. The trip back to the main floor didn't take much time at all, and when she stepped out of the elevator, her breath caught at the sight in front of her. A woman stood there dressed head to toe in a floor-length black dress with a wide-brimmed hat perched on top of her head. A black scarf wrapped around the hat to under her chin, masking most of her face. She stood with her back to the elevator, but Eva just knew it had to be Mary Grant. "Hello," she said brightly, trying to curb her enthusiasm. She usually wasn't so affected by celebrity, but the woman standing in front of her, if it were indeed Mary Grant, was a legend. Reclusive, talented, and daring. She wrote stories that meant something. The figure turned, and Eva was met with wide blue eyes and black hair in a bob framing an angular face. The blue eyes blinked several times before the woman spoke. "Hello." Her voice came out raspy as if from years of smoking, and she offered what didn't quite pass as a smile. "I'm checking in. Can you help me with that?" While Eva wasn't wearing the typical bed and breakfast uniform of khaki pants and a black top, she must have looked official enough to pass for an employee. "Yes, absolutely." "Calm down, Eva," she reminded herself and stepped to her desk. "Can I get your name?" Her voice squeaked a little, and she looked down at the computer to let the embarrassment pass. "Yes, it should be under Grant." It was her! Eva took in a deep breath and typed in the name to pull up her reservation. "Yes, we've got you here for a week, staying in the orange room. You'll be right next to Mrs. Weston." She looked up, but Mary Grant didn't show any indication that she was happy about that or that she was unhappy either. She seemed indifferent. "I just showed Mrs. Weston to the attic. We haven't named that room yet. She seems to think the space will be sufficient for you. I hope that's the case." "I'm sure it will be fine," Mary said, her gaze flitting to the front window and back. "Do you have many guests here?" "Not at the moment," Eva admitted. It was a slow week, the week before Christmas. "We usually feel a lull here around the holidays." Mary nodded. "I expected as much. Good." Eva smiled and handed over her key. "Do you need assistance with your bags?" "No, thank you," she said, then pulled up the handle of a rolling bag. "I'll come up with you," Eva said, standing. "That's not necessary. I'm bringing up Mrs. Weston's bags," she admitted. "I see." It was as if Mary was attempting to hide her reaction, but Eva caught the slightest narrowing of her eyes. They entered the elevator, things a little tight with Rosalie's 3 bags, but the door closed and began its ascent. "Is there public access to the backyard?" Mary asked. Eva blinked. "Excuse me?" "Public access to the backyard." Eva blinked. Oh, no. I mean, there is no coded gate, but we've not had trouble with that." She smiled, but she felt her own hesitation. In reality, there had been an issue once after a man had been shot in the alley, but that had been a one-time thing, and Ms. Grant was likely worried about photographers. "It's secure. Don't worry." "I see." The door dinged, and Mary exited first, Eva following with the other woman's bags. She paused at Rosalie's room. "Please let me know if you need anything at all, Miss Grant." "I will. Thank you. She paused for Ava's name. "Eva," Eva said. "I'm Eva Stewart." Mary nodded and slipped into her room, while Eva turned to the task of wrestling the expensive luggage into the other room. It was certainly going to be an odd week. "She's here, right now?" Pete Jenkins nearly jumped from his seat in the wicker lounger across the circle from where Eva sat. "Hush, Pete." His wife Kay patted his knee, causing the small dog on his lap to give her a glare. "Sorry," he said, looking somewhat ashamed. "I just heard a rumor she's friends with A.C. George." Eva smiled, recognizing the name of Pete's favorite mystery author. "She's barely left her room," Eva said, keeping her voice low. "But I didn't expect anything else." "It's surprising she came at all," Geraldine Walker mused. Her thick sweater nearly engulfed her thin frame and matched her fur-lined boots as if the weather was deserving of such measures. "Who is she?" Elijah Tang asked. As usual, he had smudges of paint on his fingers and even on his flannel shirt. He'd arrived apologizing for his casual dress, but he'd come from his new painting studio where he was working on a new piece. "Only the memoir writer of our time," Geraldine said, her flair for the dramatic showing in the way she waved a wrinkled hand through the air as she spoke. "She really has written some amazing books," Dr. Vicky Clem said. She shared the oversized love seat with Ava, both with a blanket over their knees. They had become fast friends ever since Vicky moved to Key West earlier that year. Willard Smith said while reaching for another fig bar Ava had made that afternoon for their murder mystery book club. The MMBC met every Friday evening on the back porch of the bed and breakfast. "Not a fan, Willard?" Elijah asked. "I prefer crime fiction, that's all." "I've read a few." All eyes turned to Jerome Makos, lead detective of the Key West Police, where he stood at the entrance to their small circle on the back deck, ensconced by filmy white curtains. Eva had turned on the heat lamps, which made the space usable year-round with Key West's usually lovely weather. "You made it," Eva said, smiling up at him. He was a new addition to the MMBC, but he'd had to skip meetings frequently due to police business. She was happy to see he'd been able to come that night. "You've read Mary Grant's books?" Vicky said, bringing Eva back to the conversation. She really should steer them away from the topic. The woman they were discussing was just a few floors above them. "Yep, they were great. But I thought we were discussing the talented Mr. Ripley." "We are," Pete said, "but Mary Grant knows A.C. George and that's all for this part of the discussion," Eva said with a laugh. "Let's jump into the book. What did everyone think?" Begrudgingly, the group followed suit, and soon a lively discussion ensued. It always seemed to be this way when they all got together. Sadly, they were missing Sarah Fisk. Eva had texted the young woman, but she'd come down with the bug and needed to rest. Likely what Benita had contracted. Eva just hoped the rest of the staff stayed healthy. That was one of the only problems with keeping a small staff. If more than a few went out sick, she was left doing everything. Something she could manage for a time, but not indefinitely. As the discussion wound down, Eva began to think about her odd guests again. They were staying until the following Friday, and she'd already seen lights on in the attic. A dormer window that faced the back courtyard where her cottage sat made it easy to see. Had they already gotten to work? "What's got you preoccupied?" Jerome asked. He leaned over as Elijah and Willard argued about one aspect of the book that Eva had lost track of. "My new guests." "It's quite the honor to have Mary Grant here," he agreed. "And Rosalie Weston," Vicky added. "She was a big movie star back in the day." "Oh, well, double honor then," he said. Eva saw a twinkle of mirth in his green eyes and assumed he didn't care much for actors or celebrities. He seemed like that type of man. "Why aren't you more excited then?" "I can't help but feel..." Eva tried to find the word, but couldn't. "What?" "Anxious." "About?" And that was just it. Eva had no idea what she was apprehensive about, only that she was. "It's nothing. I'm sure I'm just tired from racing to get the attic suitable." There was no way she was going to say she'd had the oddest feeling that afternoon after getting her guests settled, like a dark cloud had landed upon the bed and breakfast. She wasn't superstitious and didn't believe in things like bad luck, but as an amateur detective, she did believe in gut feelings. What did that mean for how she was feeling now? Her gaze collided with Jerome as he studied her expression, but she could tell he didn't fully buy her answer and was wondering what was behind it. The conversation turned quickly to their Christmas celebration, the one Eva was going to host, and everyone made sure they knew what they were bringing. The celebration would act as their dinner together for the month, and Eva looked forward to hosting everyone. When the book club members started leaving, Eva sat quietly, observing as everyone else said their goodbyes. "Hey, Eva," Jerome said when everyone but Elijah and Vicky had gone. "I was thinking..." She looked up from where she still sat and saw that he was avoiding her gaze. "What is it, Jerome?" "I was wondering if you'd like to maybe get some brunch with me tomorrow?" Heat flooded through her. Was he asking her on a date? "Just brunch out, since it gets so chaotic here." He offered a lopsided grin. "We can discuss your piano classes." And just like that, her hopes crashed. He wasn't interested in dating her. He just wanted to make sure she was going through with it. In reality, getting her private investigator's license in Florida had been Jerome's idea. It was part of his requirement if she and her book club members were going to be involved in cases. Seeing as how they'd helped solve 4 murders in the last year, she felt the stipulation was hardly necessary, but she also knew he had suggested it as more than a caveat. In a trusting moment with Jerome, she'd opened up about her Uncle Sal, explaining his role in her life as a mentor when her wealthy parents were away and how he'd been a private investigator. Eva had once considered getting licensed in Florida, but she'd always found reasons not to. Now Jerome was giving her a reason to pursue it. Doing her best not to think of his offer as anything more than a friendly get-together, Eva nodded her agreement. "That would be nice." "Great. I'll text you the location. See you around 10? "Perfect." Jerome said goodbye and left, Elijah following him, but Vicky stayed. She'd quickly become Ava's closest friend in Key West, despite the fact they'd only just gotten to know each other that year. They had both been busy in the fall and start of winter, but they still got together for movie nights and manicures when they could. "So, what was that all about? Did I hear mention of brunch? Has the good detective finally asked you on a date?" Eva felt the faint blush color her cheeks, but she busied herself with cleanup. "We're just going out to eat and to discuss the license." Vicky rolled her eyes. "He'll use any excuse to take you out without taking you out." "I'm sure it's not like that," Eva began to protest, though her friend's words held merit. "Ask him, tomorrow," Vicky challenged. "See if he'll take you on a real date." "I couldn't," Eva said, feeling more and more like a schoolgirl with a crush rather than a woman in her late 40s. "No harm done if he says it's just a friend thing, but if he admits he'd like it to be a date or he'd like the next time to be a date, then there you go." Eva considered her friend's advice, but thankfully was saved from agreeing or not when Vicky pulled on her jacket. "I've got to run. It's been too long of a day, and I have the weekend off for once. Here's hoping I don't get any calls." "Yes, hoping that too." They embraced and Vicky left, leaving Eva behind to consider Jerome's cryptic brunch request. At the end of it all, she knew all that mattered was that she had a good friend in the handsome detective, and they had plenty of time for dates, should that ever be something that crossed their paths. Chapter 2. Eva adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder as she looked around the crowd milling in front of one of her favorite brunch spots. In fact, she'd been shocked when Jerome had suggested meeting there. Just like the brunch that her chef Anton put on every Saturday morning, this place was usually packed. "Hey there," Jerome said from behind her. She spun to find him standing there, looking more casual than she was used to seeing him, in jeans and a long-sleeved flannel shirt. It wasn't exactly cold outside, but she figured it was a nod to his roots in New York, and the temperature had dipped lower for the week. Though cold was relative when you considered they were in Florida. "Ready to eat?" "How in the world did you get a reservation?" she asked, following him toward the hostess who stood behind an outdoor podium. "I helped the owner during a robbery case a few months ago. He said I'd always have a table, though this is the first time I've taken him up on the offer." "You're kidding." She shook her head in surprise. "This is one of my favorite places, but I can never get a reservation when I try." "Well, happy to oblige." He gave his name to the woman behind the podium, and she smiled, motioning a waitress over. "He is an honored guest," the woman said with a flash of a somewhat seductive smile. "Please see that Detective Makos gets whatever he needs." The hostess didn't even look Ava's way, but soon they were threading through a buzzing crowd, and Ava refocused on the atmosphere and amazing smells. They were shown to a cozy table and were immediately offered drinks. Ava ordered coffee, as did Jerome. Then they looked through the menu. "This all sounds amazing," he said, shaking his head and shrugging. "Will you order for me since you like it here so much?" She laughed. "Really?" "Yep. I trust you." He tossed the menu down and leaned back, sighing in contentment as if all the hard work was done. "What do you like?" "Surprise me." He was no help, but she evaluated what she'd seen him eat before, and settled on the stuffed French toast, making it a combination with eggs, bacon, and a cup of fruit. She selected the Belgian waffle for herself, along with a side of fruit. The waitress took their orders and seemed to flash an even brighter smile at Jerome, but Ava chose to ignore it. "They're friendly here," he said, leaning forward as if slightly embarrassed. "You must have done some good work on the case." He shared the details of a harrowing case that had almost ended badly, not only for Jerome but the owner as well. By the end of the story, she saw why everyone was so excited to see him there. "You saved his business, and all of their jobs." "I was just doing my job. Nothing more, nothing less." She narrowed her eyes, but soon their food arrived and the conversation was stilted due to the amazing tastes before them. They chatted about the holidays, plans they had, and general topics around Christmas as they finished up the wonderful meal. "That was very good," he said, tossing his napkin on the table. "You can order for me any day." She laughed, wiping her mouth delicately before adding her napkin to the tabletop as well. "I just thought back to what I've seen you eat. Cheater." He grinned, and she prepared herself for the topic of her license when he tilted his head and asked, "We talked about my plans for the holiday, but what will you do?" Ever since her parents' sudden death years ago, she'd found that the holidays lacked a sense of peace like they used to. There was no longer a reason to go home to New York. No reason for her to adjust to the cold or to get a tree. No presents to buy, aside from those for friends and her employees. It's hard, she finally admitted after she'd remained quiet for a long moment. I mean, with my family gone, there hasn't been a reason to celebrate in the way I used to. I was a big proponent of Christmas time when I was younger, but now I suppose it's a little like every other day. No, don't say that, Jerome said, his frown deepening. I'm not Scrooge, she countered. I do love the holidays. I just don't go all out like I used to. He'd already admitted he was going back to New York to visit his sister and her family, nieces and nephews and all, but it was clear he was a fan of Christmas. I suppose if I didn't have family to visit, it would be difficult. Still. He looked up and met her eyes. There was something there that seared through her, and she found herself wanting to celebrate Christmas with this man. But that was out of the question. This was somewhat of a working meeting, and Jerome's phone rang. Sorry, he said, looking ashamed as he answered it. He'd already explained that he was on call that weekend, and she understood. Where? He said, looking around as if for a piece of paper. Eva rustled through her purse and drew out a notepad and pen. He mouthed his thanks and began scribbling like crazy. And he was taken where? More writing. And you're sure it was poison? At this, Eva sat up straighter, trying to read his handwriting upside down, but with no luck. It would be hard to read right side up with how fast he was scribbling. When he ended the call, he met her gaze. Looks like our brunch will be cut short. I'm sorry. She wanted to remind him that they'd already finished and should be vacating the restaurant anyway to give space, but what he'd said intrigued her. Someone had been poisoned. She assumed they weren't dead either, seeing as how he'd written something that looked like the word hospital and, do you want to come along? She blinked. Me? I didn't invite anyone else to brunch, he said with a grin. She was close to asking him why he'd invited her, because not once had he brought up getting her license. But the way he was looking at her now dismissed all thoughts she'd had. I'd love to go. I thought you might say that, he said, then reached down and grabbed her hand, navigating them both out of the restaurant. The drive to the crime scene hadn't taken long, and Jerome parked less than a block away, waving his badge at the officer keeping the public back. She's with me, he said. The officer merely nodded. Remember, don't touch anything. Eva gave him a withering look, but agreed all the same as they ducked below police tape and walked down a narrow walkway toward a Pepto-Bismol pink door. She followed him inside and let her eyes adjust to the dim light. The condo was sparsely furnished and looked too clean and too sterile. Is this a rental? She asked. Good catch. Yes, it is. Jerome began looking around and using his pen to look through a small pile of papers on the kitchen countertop. Eva walked into the tiny living room. To one side was a small couch that could fit 2 people. There was another chair on the opposite wall. The television was small and looked like it belonged in a previous decade. Nothing jumped out to her, so she moved toward the bedroom. Aside from the door to the bathroom, which stood open, it was the only other door. She paced around the bed, then bent down to look underneath. Find anything? Jerome said, his voice startling her out of her focus. Actually? She indicated a spot on the floor. I think I have. Jerome rushed around the bed and knelt next to her. What do we have here? He said, though it sounded more like he was talking to himself. Hey, a little help in here? He called out. A member of the forensic team came in, and he had them pick up as much of the white powder as possible. Then he stood. Are you sure you don't just want to become a detective? He asked with a grin. I'm a bed and breakfast owner. You know that. He gave a sigh, then moved to the closet behind 2 sliding mirrored doors. Clothes hung neatly, and they all seemed to be of expensive taste. Eva caught sight of a label and angled in to see it better. What is it? Jerome asked. I recognize this label. You do? He pulled on a glove and carefully pulled out the suit coat so she could better see it. Can you pull open the left side, please? He did, and she examined the label. Yes, this is from France, an expensive brand. She took in the wear of the coat. I almost think this jacket wasn't original to the owner. Jerome frowned. How could you know that? A few reasons, she said, going so far as to allow herself a small smile. Nothing gloating, just happy that she was going to be of use here. See that small tag? He leaned over to see what she was looking at. It was very small and made of plastic. I spent a semester abroad, part of it in Paris. I saw second-hand stores that marked their clothing like this. So our man was French and bought second-hand clothing? She looked back into the closet, observing. Not everything. Those are some name brands you can pick up anywhere, at a mall or something. But there are a few nicer pieces. It looks as if the man, whoever he was trying to look like he was living above his own means. I can tell his shoes have been resold once. I'm not even going to ask, Jerome said with a chuckle. He gingerly rested the suit coat back in the closet and looked around. But good observations. I guess this place rents for cheaper than a nice hotel here, so that would fit in line with your theory. It was his turn to take a closer inspection of the bedside table. What is it? There was a glass here. He indicated a faint moisture ring. If we find that glass, we could find whatever poisoned him. If that white powder turns out not to be the poison, that is. Eva quickly moved into the kitchen where she'd seen a covered trash can. Jerome was right behind her. She used her foot to pop the lid, but the trash bag that they'd expected to find was gone. It's been cleaned out, Eva said. Officer, he called out, I need you to take several people and scour the nearby trash cans and dumpsters. We're looking for a trash bag that has a glass in it. That might be the only thing in there, or there could be other trash. My guess is that the glass would be broken, but maybe not. Got it? The officer nodded and rushed outside to begin the search with his fellow officers. Good eye, he said, smiling back at Eva. You too. We make a good team. His gaze stalled on her for a moment, and she felt that same heat she'd had when they'd sat at brunch together. A familiarity that she enjoyed, but one she also wasn't sure how to handle. She liked Jerome. He was handsome and funny and clever, but he also wasn't very direct. It was odd knowing what he did for a job and how it was his job to get to the truth of people and situations, but she assumed some things were difficult no matter your profession. Perhaps relationships were that for them both. Shall we go to the hospital? She said, guessing that it would be his next stop. He opened his mouth as if to turn her down, but then his head tilted to the side. We do make a good team. And yes, let's go to the hospital. That is, unless you need to get back to your bed and breakfast. Eva assumed he was teasing her, but the intensity behind his eyes shifted that thought. He was curious to see what she would do. She didn't like facing a test, no matter if it were from a friend or a stranger, but in this case, she decided to brush off her worries. No, let's go. He nodded and led the way, Eva following with the sense that yet another case might be on their doorstep. Who was the man who'd been in this condo? Why had he been poisoned? Would he live? All questions she hoped they would know the answers to by the end of the day. Chapter 3. Eva plodded up the pathway toward the Keys' bed and breakfast. The visit to the hospital had been a bust. The doctors told them the man, his name was Jacques Hubert according to his passport, had been poisoned but was resting after they had pumped his stomach. They were still waiting on the results to discover the poison and if it was a match for the powder that Eva had found at the crime scene. She had a gut feeling it would register as the same, though gut feelings didn't really work with the police. Still, it had felt like a letdown to not be able to question the man or know much about his condition. She knew tests took time and that patience was a virtue, but that didn't mean she wasn't curious. When Jerome had suggested she go back to the B&B, promising to let her know anything that he found out, she agreed. Thankfully, Jake had been able to take over her shift that morning. It was a slower shift since they didn't have anyone specifically coming in, but she wanted to get back in case he needed to go home. He looked up when she walked in and put down the book he'd been reading. Welcome back. Thanks for taking over on such short notice, she said, letting out a small sigh she couldn't manage to keep in. Everything all right? He asked. While Jake had a keen mind and had often helped her with technical things, his expertise in computers was valuable. She wasn't sure that Jacques' fate was something she should share with him. Yes, I think I'm more tired than I'd expected is all. She smiled back at him, then nodded toward the kitchen. Everything go all right for brunch? She'd allowed Anton to hire 2 servers, but they only came for brunch on Saturdays or the occasional Sunday if Anton was feeling like he wanted to add in an extra day. Seemed to go well, but Julia had to cancel. Oh no. Eva glanced toward the kitchen where she could still hear movement, likely cleaning going on. Did you get roped in to help? Nope, Sarah came. I guess Anton called her? Ava's eyebrows rose and she turned to face the kitchen. She did she? While she was glad that obviously Sarah was feeling better, she was also concerned that Anton was overstepping. Sarah had no need to come in on a Saturday, especially after she'd been sick that week. "I'll be right back," Eva said distractedly. She'd given Anton a chance in her kitchen when he hadn't been able to find any other work due to a past history in the criminal system. But she'd known him for years before he came to work for her, and she'd had a long, honest conversation with him about his past. Where he'd gone astray stemmed from his involvement with his family. As dear to him as they were very bad influences. Thankfully, he hadn't gotten into too much trouble, but no one else seemed to look past his smaller infractions, or the tattoos he had. She'd merely seen a man looking for work, and when she'd tasted his food, the deal was done. Allowing him to take ownership of the Saturday and occasional Sunday morning brunch was exactly the next opportunity he needed. Of course, a small part of her was afraid he might make too big of a name for himself and leave her high and dry without a chef, but she'd cross that bridge when the time came. After all, she'd rather see his dreams succeed than to tie him down. Entering the kitchen, the sense of leftover breakfast food enveloped her, as did the heat of the room. It was clear the dishwasher was running, and the humidity from it was filling the area. "Anton?" Laughter came from the other side of the divider, and she walked further, peering around. The dishwasher sound was almost deafening, which seemed to mute her footsteps and calls as she rounded the corner to see Sarah and Anton laughing. They leaned close to each other, and he was showing her a video on his phone. "Sarah?" she said more loudly this time, and they broke apart like she'd caught them doing something they shouldn't be. "Hi, Eva." Sarah looked guilty, but from what Eva could see, there was no reason to be, unless they were watching something inappropriate. But that didn't sound like either of them. "What's going on, Anton?" Eva said, keeping her voice neutral. "Hey," he said, his usually jovial air coming back. He reminded her of a tattooed Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in a chef's outfit. "Was just showing Sarah Anton's niece in a ballet dance from last weekend." Eva grinned at the way Anton always referred to himself in the third person. He was such a kind man. She noticed his smile appeared genuine, but Sarah still looked nervous. Why, Eva couldn't tell. "I'm sure she's adorable," Eva said. Over the years Anton had worked for her, he'd shown her many videos of his niece, the one he doted on. She was growing into a lovely little girl and was lucky to have him as an uncle. Eva turned to Sarah. "You're feeling better then?" "I am." She blushed and tucked a piece of brown hair behind her ear. "Anton texted and said they needed help. I'm pretty sure I have the 24-hour bug or something because I felt fine this morning and I said I'd come help. I hope you don't mind." She sounded nervous, as if Eva would object, but then Eva remembered that the young woman was still getting used to having a steady job. In addition to that, Sarah wasn't used to having family around, and that's what Eva now considered them to be. While they weren't related by blood, Sarah's mother and Eva had both felt as if Sal Lazzaro was a second father to them. He had done right by them both and became somewhat of a grandfather figure to Sarah. His death 8 years earlier had hit Sarah hard, causing her to seek out Eva for help in solving his murder. While they hadn't done any official work on it yet, Eva knew there would come a time when Sarah wanted to seek after the truth, and Eva had already agreed to help. Cold cases were difficult, even more so with a case that had been labeled as solved, but Eva knew Sarah wouldn't let that stop her. "Of course I don't mind," Eva said, smiling back at the younger woman. "I'm glad you were available, but I'm really just happy that you're feeling better." "Thanks, Eva." Sarah looked genuinely relieved, and Eva hoped the young woman knew she meant a great deal to Eva. It wasn't just that she worked for the bed and breakfast. They were becoming like family, and Eva wanted to preserve that. "What have you been up to this morning?" Anton asked, oblivious to the connection the two women had deepened in the last minute. "I hope you got breakfast." "Anton has—" Eva held up a hand. "I did," she said, smiling back at the chef. "Thank you. Actually, hello?" Everyone turned to see Rosalie standing at the door. She wore a long shift dress in a deep burgundy color and enough makeup to make Eva think she was heading to the red carpet. "Hello, Mrs. Weston. How can I help you?" Eva said, taking a step toward the woman. "I was wondering if you had any seltzer water." Eva reassessed her observation of the woman. Was her skin pale beneath the rouge on her cheeks? Did she look unwell? "Are you not feeling well?" Eva asked. It's nothing. Mary suggested it might help." She blinked rapidly as if blinking away tears, and Eva took a quick step forward. "What's wrong, Mrs. Please? Call me Rosalie, and it's nothing, really." "Anton has ginger ale," Anton said, coming from the area of the industrial refrigerator with a cold can. "Will this do?" I'm sure that's not in line with your diet." Eva looked past Rosalie to see Mary Grant behind her. She was still dressed in black, but this time her hat was gone, and in its place, Eva saw how the dark hair, cut in the severe bob, was at odds with the woman's already angular face. It almost looked as if she'd had plastic surgery. The angles of her face seemed unnatural to the plumpness of her lips. Even her eyes looked too tight for her otherwise delicate features. "Oh, I'm sure it wouldn't be," Rosalie began. "No, it will only make you feel worse. Perhaps we can hire someone to fetch something for you." The way she said fetch grated on Eva. "There are places that deliver," Eva began, but Mary clasped Rosalie's arm in what looked like a painful grip. "Trust me, I know what's best," Mary commanded the actress, who seemed unable to disagree. "Come, we have work to do." Rosalie sent an apologetic look over her shoulder, and they headed for the front door. That's when Eva saw Jerome walking up the steps. "I'm going to go talk with Jerome," Eva said, turning back to Anton and Sarah, but it was clear everyone was stuck on what had just occurred. "Was it something Anton said?" Anton asked. Sarah's smile returned, and she seemed to mentally shake herself. "I used to work for women like that a lot." "Like what?" Eva asked. "You know, demanding, won't let you disagree with them, things like that. It's not fun to be considered the help when they're around." Eva could only imagine, but then everyone heard, "Call the cops!" from the main room, and Eva smiled back at her employees. "Looks like Jerome is chatting with Poirot. I'll see you two later. And Sarah?" The young woman met her gaze. "Thanks again for coming in." "Stick 'em up. Come on, you can say it, Poirot." Jerome threw his hands up. "Stick 'em up." Eva laughed as she neared the cage, where her Amazon parrot bobbed back and forth watching Jerome. She often wondered what he thought, if anything, about people when they tried to teach him phrases. It was clear he only said what he wanted to, and almost never at the time they wanted, unless it was for a treat. "Have you resorted to bribery yet?" she asked, coming up next to Jerome. The spicy scent of his cologne greeted her in a familiar way. It was a scent she only associated with him. Fresh, clean, but with an edge. He looked over at her and smiled. "That was my next step." "Pretty bird gets a treat," Poirot said. "Now he talks," Jerome said, rolling his eyes to the ceiling. Eva offered the bird a few almonds, having him show off to Jerome what he already knew how to do. Then she turned to her detective friend and asked the question she'd been dying to ask. "What did you find?" Jerome motioned to the back corner of the B&B. While no one else was in the main room, she understood that it was police business, and he didn't want anyone overhearing them, even accidentally. They sat in a pair of chairs beside a palm tree, which was decorated with Christmas tree lights. "First off, Mr. Hubert entered America almost a month ago." "He's been living in that small apartment for a month?" Eva found it hard to believe anyone could live there for more than a few days, so a month was hard to swallow. "That's just it. His passport was stamped at the Baltimore airport." "Maryland?" "Yes. And we've got a reservation for a rental car there that was eventually picked up 3.5 weeks ago from a rundown motel." Eva narrowed her eyes. "So he stayed in Maryland for almost the whole month, then came back down here?" "Looks that way." Jerome leaned forward. "We have him arriving here 3 days ago." "Anything about his past in France?" "I've got a request in, but I don't hold out much hope on hearing back soon. There's no emergency contact that I could find. Fortunately, the doctor does seem to think he'll be all right." "Strange, though. Why come to America, stay in a budget motel, then come down to Key West only to be poisoned?" Jerome shrugged. "Who knows? But I was also able to check out the contents of his wallet. Turns out he didn't have much in there aside from some U.S. and French money. Oh, and this picture." Jerome held up a photo encased in an evidence bag. "I didn't want to ruin it, so I stuck it in a bag since I couldn't ask Mr. Hubert if I could borrow it." He grimaced, but handed over the image. Eva accepted it and looked down at the crumpled picture worn from being kept in what appeared to be a well-used wallet. She noticed where one side of the image was torn, almost as if someone had been ripped out. It made her curious and drew her attention fully away from the actual image for a few moments before she turned her attention to the picture. Then Eva gasped. What is it?" Eva blinked and drew the picture closer. There was no severe haircut, dramatic makeup, or sharp features, but the woman smiling back from the photo looked eerily similar to Mary Grant. Could it be a coincidence? I think I recognize this woman. You... what? Her hair is different, and she was clearly younger when this was taken, and maybe she's had plastic surgery. But I think this is Mary Grant. Really? Jerome frowned and took back the photo, re-examining it. Mary Grant doesn't even have an author photo. Well, I've seen her. She's staying here, remember? In fact, you passed her on your way in. He shook his head. I wasn't even looking. Too busy texting one of the officers stationed at the hospital. You sure about this? Eva took the picture back and looked at it again. Mary, if it was her, was smiling and looking away from the camera as if she didn't realize the picture was being taken. It was more of a profile shot, but was she sure it was Mary? I don't know. She felt fairly certain, but... She pulled the image closer, then farther away. Fairly certain and positive were two very different things in an investigation. I can look into it, Jerome said. I don't know what we'll find on Miss Grant. I hear she's rather reclusive, but maybe I'll see her here, too. True, but what are the odds that this man would have had a photo of one of my guests in his wallet? And it looks worn, as if he's taken it out to look at it often. He's from France and Miss Grant is American, Jerome mused. What could the connection be? And why was he poisoned? That's the question of the hour, or the next few days. Jerome laughed. I'm still waiting to hear back on what the poison even was. The powder may help if they can identify it and run some tests on Mr. Hubert, but that'll take time. Eva considered the options. Was it possible Mr. Hubert knew Mary years ago, perhaps when the picture was taken? Was there some minor connection there, and he just happened to be in Key West when she was? Maybe to see her? That seemed even less likely, but on the other hand, it was a rather big coincidence to take at face value. What will you do next? Eva asked, turning to refocus on Jerome. 2 things. Check into the Baltimore angle. I want to know what Mr. Hubert is doing in America, and then talk to your guest. Eva sucked in a breath. Not okay? He asked, looking surprised. Naturally, that would be your next step. She thought back to Mary's odd interaction with Rosalie, and how the actress had allowed it. She'd seemed different than the first time Eva had spoken with her. She's quite eccentric. I don't know how she'll handle you questioning her about this, especially the fact it's only based on my guess as to the woman's identity in the photo. I'll use my charm, he said with a wink, and I'll be very respectful. It's more to rule her out as a possibility rather than anything else. Eva smiled. That's a good point. Is she here? He asked. Yes, but could you perhaps come back? It sounded as if she and my other guest were going to get to work on the memoir. I'd like to have you come when it won't be too much of a disturbance. Perhaps I can find out when a good time is. Without letting the cat out of the bag, he said. Mum's the word, she said, making a solemn face. All right, I'll come back for a visit later today if you can arrange that with her. Seeing you 3 times today. Why, Jerome, people will talk. She'd meant the words as a joke, but he turned to look at her, leveling his gaze. I'm sure they will. His grin said the rest. She felt the blush coming and shot to her feet, busying herself with offering Poirot another treat, more than he really needed in one morning. She turned when Jerome was at a safe distance near the door. I'll see you later, then. Jerome's knowing grin met her backwards glance, and she schooled her features not to react to the charming man. Yep. See you then, Eva. She watched him go, her stomach doing flips. They'd had brunch together, but it had felt like a working brunch even though they hadn't talked about work. Had she just assumed it was about work? Shoving confusing thoughts from her mind, Eva squared her shoulders and set off to start her to-do list for the day. There was nothing better to occupy her mind and keep it off a certain detective than work that needed to get done. Chapter 4. While Eva had expected to see Jerome again, she actually had to wait until the next day when he promised to drop by after their breakfast service was over. He'd caught another holiday robbery case in the midst of the poisoning, and she'd had nothing to say other than that she understood, which she did. What she didn't understand was the odd feeling she had that there was more to Mary Grant than a reclusive memoir author. The woman asked for her meals to be brought up to her, something Eva was happy to do, but there was something about her room that was off. She hadn't meant to pry, but when she delivered that morning's breakfast, she'd noticed that the closet was open. At first glance, it was filled with mostly black clothing in a draping type of style, but then to the right, there were several outfits in light colors. While that wasn't exactly odd, the woman's behavior was. She was jittery and anxious to get Eva out of her room, but also trying to appear as if she were busy working, though all the papers on the table in her room were blank. Of course, it wasn't customary for Eva to do research on guests, and yet she'd come away from that morning's encounter with more of that gut feeling. Covertly, she began digging into the woman's online life. She felt it was understandable, given the possible photo as well as the woman's celebrity status. She was fairly shocked when she realized there was next to nothing to find out about Mary Grant. She wasn't sure how that was possible, but not even the blurry images claiming to be of her helped. They were all from too far away, and nothing that seemed to be backed up by truth. Now, as Eva dusted around the main floor of her bed and breakfast, waiting for her only other guest for that week to arrive, she contemplated what she'd learned. Mary had no school transcripts that the public could access. No one really knew where she'd gone to college, and no one could truly confirm where she lived. There were rumors it was in the Virginia countryside, others said somewhere in Maryland, and a few claimed she'd moved up to Canada as a way to avoid the public. Eva knew that Jerome would have better luck with his access to law enforcement information, but she knew that would need to be his call to make. Certainly her gut feelings weren't enough for an investigation. She had heard from him late the night before, saying that they'd identified the poison. It was arsenic in a relatively low dose, and now they were tracking down where it could have come from. Unfortunately, he'd told Eva it was shockingly easy to purchase the poison, and without knowing who did the poisoning, they need to establish a search pattern locally, but online purchasing was an option too. Thankfully, Jacques was getting better, but he still wasn't up for being questioned, so there was another dead end for the time being. The door to the elevator dinged open, and she turned to see Rosalie walk in, a bouquet of wilted flowers in her arms and a dazed look on her face. Her cheeks looked pale, her eyes glassy. "Good morning," Eva said, sending an odd glance to the flowers before meeting the woman's gaze. She looked tired, but Eva wasn't sure if that was the lack of makeup or the woman's actual fatigue. Eva also noticed how she was dressed, very differently from the day before, in a pair of what Eva would classify as high-end sweatpants, with her hair up in a crooked ponytail. Are these from you?" She looked up, and Eva caught the slight red rim around the woman's eyes. Had she been crying? "Mrs. Weston, are you all right?"
"Please, call me Rosalie."
She sniffed and held out the bouquet.
"Did you put these in my room?"
No, I'm sorry. You didn't have them delivered?"
"Carnations! No."
She said it as if it was the last thing she would have ever done.
I don't like carnations at all."
"Well, here." Eva stepped forward, putting on her proverbial guest services hat. "Let me take care of them for you." Rosalie practically threw them at Eva.
"Does anyone else have the key to my room?"
"I'm not sure I know what you mean. My housekeeper and maid have key cards, but that's it. We keep them protected."
"Okay."
Her forehead wrinkled, and she turned away toward the elevator.
"But how did the flowers get in my room?"
Eva frowned. She'd assumed the bouquet had been left at her door, but if they were in her room... I'll talk with my staff. It's possible someone dropped them off for you, and one of the women who worked here put them in your room for you. That seemed to satisfy her, and she took a step back. "Can I get you anything else, Rosalie?" Eva called after her.
"No, thank you."
Rosalie disappeared into the elevator, and Eva went to the large trash can in the kitchen behind the breakfast eating area. She tossed them, but not before she caught sight of a card. Pulling it out carefully, she opened it. It read, "For my rosebug." Eva frowned. That was odd. It was clearly a play on Rosebud, but was that referring to Rosalie? And if so, why had she doubted they were for her? Eva tucked the card into her pants pocket, assuring herself that she'd look into it later, and made her way back to the front and her other duties. A few hours later, after checking in her last guest for the week, Eva found a smile tugging at the corners of her lips to see Jerome making his way up the steps to the bed and breakfast. "Morning," he said, pulling off a light jacket. "I think you mean afternoon," she said, checking her watch. It was nearing 1 o'clock. "I guess so," he said, looking down at his phone. "You haven't seen Miss Grant leave, have you?" "No." Eva shook her head. "She pretty much stays inside." I gave her a call and she's expecting us. Eva blinked. Us? I may have mentioned that I wanted you there as a type of colleague. He shrugged. She seemed all right with it and told me to meet her in the attic. He looked to Eva, silently asking the question of where that might be. This way, she said with a smile. The sensation of being called Jerome's colleague, if a bit overstated, filled her with warmth. They hadn't yet finalized her route to becoming licensed in Florida, but she had been doing some investigation of her own into it and had several ideas of the classes she'd take. They entered the elevator, and she pressed the button for floor 3. I thought this place only had 2 floors. Hence the attic, she said with a grin. Ruben's been renovating it for me. Originally, I wanted him to help me remodel the White Room, but then decided this should come first. It's a bit of a suite and a meeting area, or whatever a guest needs it to be. It could even sleep 4 or 5 if necessary. I'm impressed. Don't get your hopes up, it's not done yet. Ruben's been away visiting family for the holidays, so it's at a bit of a standstill, she said, and smiled over at him just as the door dinged their arrival and slid open. Nice, he whispered, as they stepped into the space where Mary was waiting for them. Eva took in the slight changes the woman had made. The desk was pulled out from the dormer window for better access, and the couch had been pushed back against the bed for what Eva assumed was a walking area. She wasn't fully certain of the concept behind it, but she didn't mind. It was all easily moved back into place and perhaps was part of Mary's creative process. Don't mind the new arrangement, Mary said, her thin-lipped smile appearing and disappearing within what felt like the same moment. I promised to replace it all the way it was. I just needed space. She said it dramatically, tossing one hand to the side before spinning on her heel and taking a seat at the chair behind the desk. Jerome moved 2 chairs over so they were facing her. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Miss Grant. I'm Detective Jerome Makos. He flashed his badge and a smile before adding, I'm also a fan of your books. Ah, well, yes, who isn't? Mary said, and that smile flashed again. Or did it? Eva felt as if the woman grew more eccentric every time she saw her. Creative people were known for that, though. Was it why she had gone into a type of hiding? And why come out now? Was Rosalie's story that interesting? Eva had also looked into Mrs. Weston. She'd seen her in a few newer movies, but they were small roles. Her heyday had been years in the past, though there was a new movie, a remake by the looks of it, where she would get to play the older version of her younger self. Critics were calling it a reawakening for her. Perhaps it was the perfect time for a book about her to come out. How can I help you? Both. She nodded at Eva, then looked over to Jerome. Well, Miss Grant, please call me Mary. Mary. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photo still in the evidence bag. Is this you? He held it out to her, and she made a show of putting on glasses before reaching out for the photo. Mary took her time studying it, turning it this way and that, before she handed it back, pulling off her glasses at the same time. No, not me. Eva looked back at the photo in Jerome's hand and studied the woman before her. It was easier now, with Mary right in front of her, to compare the images. They seemed very similar aside from clothing, which looked to be from years ago, and the hair. Then again, it wasn't a high-quality photo, and youth could account for the similarities. Was Mary an older version of the woman in the picture? Eva felt her brain hurt at the thought. It was either her or it wasn't, right? Do you know a man named Jacques Aubert? Jerome asked next. Mary tilted her head to the side. No, I don't. May I ask what this is about? Eva noticed the woman's eyes narrow, flitting to the photo, then back to Jerome. Did she recognize herself? Or was she telling the truth about it not being her? I'm not at liberty to talk about an open case. But clearly you came here hoping for what? An identification of some kind? I can assure you there are no public photos of myself out there. It's a miracle you manage it, Eva commented, curious if the woman would admit to how it was possible. I am very careful, she said, crossing her legs and resting her folded hands on top of her knee. Now, is there anything else? I'm in the middle of writing. She indicated the pile of papers with notes scribbled everywhere. Where is Rosalie? Eva asked. I saw her earlier with some flowers, but... Oh, those flowers, Mary said, shaking her head. She bought them yesterday and then pretended she didn't. Odd if you ask me. You saw her buy the flowers? Eva asked. No, just that she had them in her room. When were you in her room? Eva felt Jerome's gaze on her and knew it was starting to sound like an interrogation. We're both on the second floor, Mary said with a shrug. I saw them when she walked in last night. It made sense. There was no flaw in the woman's logic or story, and Eva began to question whether Rosalie had bought the flowers and... What, forgot? Wanted to pretend she hadn't? But why? Now, if that is all, I'd like to get back to work. Mary stood, a new smile appearing. This one looked more forced, but it lasted longer. Yes, of course. Thank you again, Ms. Mary, for your time. Certainly anything to help the Key West police. Eva and Jerome exited the attic onto the elevator and traveled to the first floor in silence. When the doors opened, she turned to him to gauge his reaction. What? He said, meeting her look with a curious one of his own. What are your thoughts? I was going to ask you first, Jerome said with a grin. I think it's odd that she seems to think it's not her. It really looks like her. I suppose it's possible she does know every photo of her ever taken, or something like that, and this isn't one. Perhaps she has a twin, Eva said with a light laugh. Jerome crossed his arms, his gaze going out the front window. It is odd, but she seems adamant. And what was all that talk about flowers? I'm not sure, Eva admitted. I got rid of a bouquet for Rosalie Weston. She said they appeared in her room, but no one has access unless it was Elena or Benita. I'm positive neither of them would leave carnations in a guest's room unless they were asked by a delivery person. I won't know until later when Benita comes in. Well, I suppose we'll wait and see. Eva nodded and Jerome turned toward the door. Let's, do brunch or something again. He turned back to her with a grin. She was about to reply when he added, We still need to talk about your license. Oh, right, the license. She tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. Yes, we'll set a date soon. He nodded and left, her gaze trailing along after him until he disappeared from view. She found herself wishing he'd asked her to brunch or dinner without the caveat, but quickly shoved those thoughts aside. They were friends and colleagues. Nothing more. Chapter 5. The wind had picked up early in the morning, and the palm trees in the backyard of the Keys bed and breakfast were losing fronds here and there. She knew it was just a moderate tropical storm blowing in, but just because it wasn't going to be severe didn't mean it couldn't create problems for her and her guests. Boss, she said, coming out of her cottage mid-morning. Good morning. The older man stood upright, his arms and shoulders strong with the muscle he'd accumulated from his work in gardens most of his adult life. See, he said, his gap-toothed smile kind as always. What do you make of the storm? Boss had lived in Key West a long time and had a sense about storms. She could trust his instincts about the weather better than anyone else, especially the news. If Boss told you to leave Key West, the storm was going to be bad. He shrugged. Not too bad. She smiled, laughing at his casual manner. Thank you, my friend. I can always trust you to be a good judge of these things. See, Boss knows. That you do, she said, gently squeezing his arm and turning to look at the damage to the backyard from the wind. It's not bad, Boss said. I'll have it cleared up before lunch. No rush, Eva said. I just hate to see all of the fronds down. They grow again, he said, with his characteristic easygoing manner. Nearly every day she thanked her lucky stars she'd met him with the help of Benita. He was a huge asset to her business, going above and beyond in handiwork, as well as gardening as needed. Thank you, she said, moving past him toward the back of the B&B. As she stepped inside, she saw two things simultaneously. One was Anton leaning against the desk talking with Sarah, and the other was the new guest who had checked in the night before. He hadn't talked much, mentioning that his flight had been choppy and he hadn't been feeling well. But now he sat at a seat near the window with a book and looked to have more color in his cheeks. While Eva wouldn't classify herself as nosy, though some may think differently, she did try her best to give every guest a personal touch while they were at her bed and breakfast. Whether that meant greeting them by name when they went out or offering specialized recommendations when they asked about restaurants or activities. But by far her favorite pastime was sitting and talking with guests when she felt they were receptive to that. Hello, Mr. Banks, she said, walking up to him and bypassing Anton and Sarah. How are you this morning? He smiled back at her, and she could instantly tell that he would be open to company. She had a sense about people and always seemed to be able to tell when they were willing to talk to her. "Please have a seat, and I'm doing well, much better than last night," he admitted with a grin. "Wonderful," she said, sliding into a dark green velvet chair. "I'm so glad to hear that. You didn't look well last night." He seemed to flush slightly, the color in his already pale cheeks building. "I do admit to being a bit grumpy when I checked in. I'm sorry about that." "Not a problem. Where did you say you came in from?" she asked, though she knew full well that he hadn't said. "Austin, Texas. It wasn't a long flight, but boy, was it choppy." "Oh, my good friend moved here from Houston. Have you been there?" "Yeah, a few years back. I'm originally from Maryland, and it's been quite the change, but I moved for work." He seemed congenial and more than willing to chat. With thinning light blonde hair and clear blue eyes, he looked to be around her age, give or take a few years younger or older, though it was hard to tell. His demeanor certainly gave off the feeling of kindness, if not a slight tinge of desperation. He wore no wedding ring, and there was something in his gaze that caused her to want to tread lightly. There was a fine line between being a gracious host and what some might perceive as flirtation. She tried to never cross that line. "What is it that you do?" she asked, keeping to safe topics like work and hobbies should they continue to talk. "I'm a software engineer. It sounds fancier than it is," he admitted with a grin. "What about you?" She blinked, and he flushed again, more deeply this time. "I mean, do you do anything besides running the bed and breakfast?" he said, trying to cover for his blunder. "No, not really," she said, though an image of Jerome and her working on a case together made her think that someday that answer might be different. "I'm divorced," he blurted, interrupting her thoughts about being a private investigator, so she forced her smile to stay. "I'm sorry to hear that. How did you come to visit the Keys bed and breakfast?" Again, she kept the topics utilitarian. "I actually won the trip, if you can believe it." Ava's smile faltered. "Won it? What do you mean?" "It was the oddest thing. I don't remember signing up for the raffle, but apparently I did. I got a call saying I'd won an all-expenses-paid vacation to Key West. You better believe I need a vacation," he said with an over-enthusiastic laugh. "So I hopped on a plane and here I am. Strange timing, I'll admit, but I don't have any family or anything, so the holidays are kind of open for me. I'll be here, then when I get back, I'll work the actual holiday to make up for it." "How nice." Ava was curious because she hadn't heard anything about a giveaway of the trip. Then again, she had noticed that the email that contained the payment information for the room hadn't come from an email address that mentioned Mr. Banks' name. She hadn't been concerned at the time since not everyone had an email address that made sense or attached to their names, but now she realized that had to be why. But no one had contacted her about this, and for some reason that was curious to her. Why wouldn't someone ask her for a discount, or about media coverage on her end, or any of the things that generally came with raffling off a business's services for personal gain? Had it been a former guest who'd enjoyed their stay so much they wanted to share that with others? If so, she wished they would have reached out to her about it. She would have offered a discount. Instead of worrying about it, though, she merely smiled and continued chatting with the man. He seemed friendly enough, but when she sensed that he was on the verge of asking her to dinner, she made a hasty excuse and slipped away from the conversation. Ava spent the rest of the morning and part of the afternoon reading to finish the next book for their murder mystery book club meeting that Friday. There were a few things she also needed to wrap up as she would be heading into the bed and breakfast's Christmas vacation time, and her payroll needed to be attended to. After all that was done, she took some time to get ready for her dinner with Geraldine, Willard, and Vicky. When Vicky showed up with a cab that evening, Ava was ready to enjoy a meal out with her friends. When they were still in the planning mode for their Christmas party, Vicky had suggested they go out to dinner for fun. Geraldine had been there when Vicky had asked Ava over the phone, so she'd invited the woman who had in turn invited Willard, since his wife Bonnie was out of town visiting family. They would make an interesting group, but Ava looked forward to it, even if she wished she'd invited Jerome to come. "Long time no see," Vicky said as Ava slipped into the cab with her. "Where are we going?" Ava asked as she buckled her seatbelt. "I let Geraldine choose, and she picked Little Gino's. That'll be nice. She said that they had healthier options for Willard," Vicky said with a grin. "Bonnie's made Geraldine his honorary diet watcher, so we'll see how that goes tonight." "You look great," Ava said, taking in Vicky's knee-high boots, burgundy dress that hit just above her knees, and a brocade jacket that had swatches of oranges and reds. "Thanks." Vicky beamed back at her.
I've been so busy, as you know, that I finally took the afternoon off. Took a bath and read, did my hair, and generally relaxed. It was wonderful. How have you been? You still have guests, right?
Eva filled her in on her newest guest, Mr. Banks, and how Rosalie had been acting lately, as well as the conversation she and Jerome had with Mary. She's definitely eccentric, but I still can't get over the fact that she picked my B&B to work on a book. I mean, of all the places.
It is odd. Did she say how she found it?
Eva shrugged. I didn't ask. Then she told Vicky about how Mr. Banks had apparently won a trip to the B&B.
Wow, all sorts of odd things happening.
Not to mention the poisoning, Eva pointed out, keeping her voice low so the cabbie couldn't overhear.
Tell me about it. They say the man is doing better, but he's suffering some nasty side effects. I can't believe it's happening around the holidays.
So it was definitely malicious.
I don't think there's any way arsenic can get into someone's system without it being on purpose, at least in the amount he had in his system. It was enough to harm him, but not kill him. You don't accidentally take arsenic.
It wasn't a suicide attempt? Eva asked, hating the thought, though she knew around the holidays it wasn't unheard of.
No, from what I heard, there was no record of the victim having purchased it.
But they haven't found out where it came from.
I have no clue. I don't have a handsome detective on speed dial, Vicky said with a wink. Do you know anything else?
No. I haven't heard from Jerome since he left after we talked to Mary.
About that?
Vicky suddenly looked guilty. Vicky, what is it? Eva asked, concerned by her friend's sudden change in attitude.
Don't be mad at me, but...
Vicky bit her lip before continuing.
I invited him tonight.
You did? Eva realized too late that she sounded too excited. Wait a second. Vicky leaned in.
You're happy I did.
I mean, why wouldn't I be? He's a friend. She almost added that he was nothing more, but she couldn't manage to get the words out. Yes, but this is more. They were nearing the restaurant, and Eva wanted to be finished with this conversation by the time they got there, or else she had a feeling Vicky would blurt it out no matter who was around. I'm glad he's coming. I mean, we had brunch the other day, and what was it, a date, not a date? What is going on between you two? Eva opened her mouth, then closed it as the cab slowed. There were 2 cars in front of them before he'd be able to pull up to the curb. Eva wasn't sure she knew what she wanted to say, though. I don't know, Vicky, she finally said. Part of me thinks I'd like more than just friendship with him. But the rest of me knows that's foolish. I'm a bed and breakfast owner, and he's a cop. We're a good team, and we'll likely be working together for a long time, especially once I get my license here in Florida, but there's no point in pushing for more. Besides, we're not in our 30s anymore.
Oh, please.
Vicky rolled her eyes.
You make it sound like you have one foot in the grave, which is not the case. Remember? I work with dead people, and you are nowhere near that.
I just don't want to rock the boat.
You mean by clarifying what's happening? Because I think you and I both know something is going on. A man doesn't ask a woman to a meal multiple times without an ulterior motive.
A motive like discussing work? Because that's what's happening.
So he says. I think it's just a tactic.
But we don't know that, Eva said, clutching her purse and readying herself to step from the cab. Besides, he's direct in everything else. Why wouldn't he just come out and ask me on a date if he's at all interested? He's been careful to add that our meetings are about work, and I'm going to respect that. They slid from the cab, Vicky reaching in to pay the man. Then they turned toward the front of the building. Ava's hair, short as it was, tossed about her head in the wind, and she saw Vicky cringe, trying to hold on to what she could of the curls in her hair.
Blasted weather, she said. I came to Key West for sunshine.
Eva smiled as they made it inside to discover they were the first ones there.
We'll wait at the table,
Vicky instructed. They both followed the waiter to a table and sat on the far side of the circular booth. Rather than pick up the menus, though, Vicky placed her hands on top of them and leveled her gaze at Eva.
You need to say something, she said.
What?
I think it has to be you. I mean, if he won't bring it up, you need to at least clear the air, know where you stand.
Ava's eyes narrowed. Is that what you do? Vicky laughed, knowing Eva was talking about the friendship between her and Elijah. While he had asked her on a date several months before, she turned him down, not wanting to risk their friendship. And yet, for the amount of time Vicky talked about Elijah and spent time with him, Eva had surmised it would still happen in time.
She just wasn't sure when that time would be, and she was leaving that up to Vicky and Elijah to figure out. I may not do that all the time, but sometimes I do, and communication is always better than guessing. You want to know, don't you? Eva waited, considering what her friend was saying. Did she want to know where she stood with Jerome? Or was knowing a worse option, with the reality that he could say there was nothing there? Wouldn't she rather have lunch with him as a friend than no lunch at all? She was about to answer when the subject of their very conversation arrived at the table wearing a light tan windbreaker and a crooked smile. "Hello, ladies," he said. Vicky leaned back, her smile too bright. "Jerome," she said, emphasizing his name. "I didn't see you there." "Yeah, just arrived. Am I late?" He surveyed the table before selecting the side that would have him sitting next to Eva. She tried not to take too much joy at that. It was a 50-50 chance, wasn't it? "Not at all," Vicky said, eyeing Eva. "We were just catching up," Eva interrupted. "How are you?" They talked about nominal things until Geraldine and Willard showed up. Once everyone had ordered and their food was delivered, Geraldine leaned against Jerome in a conspiratorial way. "So, Detective, what nefarious thing is happening in our beloved Key West at the moment?" He chuckled, taking a bite of his steak and chewing thoughtfully before he answered, sending a look toward Eva. "Not too much. It's a little quiet due to the upcoming holidays." "And why don't I believe that?" Geraldine said. Willard rolled his eyes. "Give the man a break. He's here for dinner, not to discuss cases." "He's withholding," Geraldine said. Her chin pointed up as she cut another piece of her baked potato. "I just know it." Eva shared a quick look with Jerome. "Ha!" They both jumped and met Geraldine's assessing gaze. "See? They are colluding." "Since when did you turn into a lawyer?" Willard said, obviously grumpy about his salad for dinner. "Geraldine," Eva began, but Jerome held up a hand. "If there was an interesting case, and I'm not saying there is, it wouldn't be at a stage where help was needed." "Wait, so there is a case?" Willard said. "Not you two," Eva said. "I thought I read something in the paper about a man being poisoned. Is that the case?" Geraldine asked. "What paper?" Jerome said too quickly. "Ha! Again! That is it." "But really, what paper? Are you going to share with me, or are you just wanting information?" Geraldine made a face, and he laughed rather than letting himself get frustrated. "All right. I am investigating a poisoning case, yes, but there is much more to it yet." "Mm-hmm." She didn't look convinced. "What poison?" "Geraldine," Eva said more sternly this time. If Jerome needs our help, you will be the first to know." She narrowed her eyes and refocused on her meal, though Eva could tell she was disappointed. Thankfully, the conversation turned back to more normal things instead of murder and poisoning, and by the end of dinner, Eva felt as if the earlier conversation hadn't even happened. Though the look Geraldine sent her as she and Vicky climbed into a cab promised that she would be getting a call, or perhaps even a visit from the older woman. At that point, Eva would likely receive the 3rd degree. "That was some dinner," Vicky said as they headed back toward the Keys bed and breakfast. "Thanks for all the help steering the conversation," Eva said dryly. "Are you kidding me?" Vicky said with a chuckle. "I wasn't going to jump into that. It's Jerome's territory, and maybe yours now, too?" Her question was leading, and Eva tried to decide how to answer. "Yes and no. We've discussed me taking the licensing test before," she said. "I think I've decided to do it, but..." "But what?" Vicky prompted. "Would I be doing it for me?" She paused, looking out the window. "Or would I be doing it to spend time with Jerome?" Vicky nudged her with her elbow. "Can it be both?" "No," Eva said more firmly than she'd intended. "It can't be about Jerome. If I'm doing it for him, then I don't know that it would be right. That could cloud my judgment. But if it's for me, for Uncle Sal, in that case, then it would be worth it." "I have no doubt you'll figure it out," Vicky said with a wide smile when Eva stepped from the cab. "We'll see," Eva said as she closed the door. Vicky waved and Eva walked up the sidewalk toward the bed and breakfast. The festive and colorful lights she'd hung were sparkling in the night.
Her B&B fit in nicely with the rest of the street, the lights just as colorful in a beachy type of holiday celebration. It was different when you didn't have snow or a big seasonal change for the holidays like she'd experienced living in New York. Nonetheless, while Eva missed the snow, she wouldn't trade living here for anything. Eva walked up the steps and paused. It looked like someone was talking to Mary, if Eva guessed rightly that it was her, outside the back door. The figure shadowed in darkness was much too tall to be Rosalie or even the new guest, Mr. Banks. Pulling out her keycard, Eva swiped herself inside, but in her haste, she caught her purse strap on the door handle. The motion pulled it off her shoulder into the floor, scattering the contents everywhere. She knelt down and shoved everything back in before rushing inside. "Oh, hello," Mary Grant said. She stood at Poirot's cage, not at the door, and Eva wondered if she'd imagined Mary talking to someone. "Hi," Eva said, confusion clearly written on her face. "Is something the matter?" Mary asked. Were you at the back door?" "Oh," Mary laughed. "I was looking out at the pool. It's so lovely with the bistro lights." Eva frowned. "But someone was with you, right?" "No." Mary held her gaze with what appeared to be total honesty. "It was just me. Are you all right, Miss Stewart?" Eva blinked. Had she imagined the figure? The bistro lights were on in the back, but it left the porch in darkness. It had to be a trick of the light. "I'm fine." "I hope you don't mind. I was just admiring your bird," Mary said, motioning to Poirot. "He's an Amazon parrot, correct?" "Yes," Eva said, coming closer to the woman. "Pretty bird," Poirot said, hoping he might get a treat for acting friendly. "His name is Poirot," Eva added, smiling back at him, then turning toward Mary. "Is there anything I can get you, Miss Grant?" "Get me? Oh, no." She wrapped her thin arms around herself. "I was just taking a break. You know, so much writing to get done." Eva nodded, thinking back to the papers strewn across the desk in the attic and the ones in her room. Nothing had looked organized, but what did Eva know of writing a book? "How is that going for you, if you don't mind me asking?" "It's going," Mary shifted, "though not as well as some of my other books." "I'm sorry to hear that. I did so enjoy your last one." "Thank you," Mary said, not quite meeting Eva's gaze. "I felt confident in that one. My Sky was an emotional book." "You mean Blue Skies?" Eva said with a nervous chuckle. She didn't like correcting the author of the book, but it was odd that she'd gotten the name of her own book wrong. Perhaps it was a nickname. "Oh, yes," Mary laughed. "That was the title I wanted. My, publisher wanted something different." "I see," Eva said, not knowing much about the publishing world. "I did want to ask you a question, though," Eva said, deciding to take the plunge while she had the woman alone and not working. "Yes?" Mary turned to look at Eva finally. "I was wondering, and you can feel free to say no to this." Eva licked her dry lips. "Would you consider being a guest at my book club's Christmas party?" "Oh." Mary looked completely surprised. "I know it's likely an imposition, but I thought it might be fun for you. We're a murder mystery book club, but—" "Murder mystery," Mary said with a chuckle. "I know, not exactly what you write about, but since you're planning to be here during that time, I thought I'd ask. I'm sure my club members would love to chat with you in an informal setting. The other guests staying here will be invited too, of course," Eva rushed to say. Perhaps she'd feel more comfortable knowing it wasn't just her. Mary looked back to Poirot and met Eva's gaze. "I'll think about it and let you know." Eva had been expecting a flat-out no, so this was even better than she'd hoped for. "That would be fine. Thank you for the consideration." Mary dipped her head and started toward the elevator. "Good night, Miss Stewart." "Call the cops," Poirot said, his loud voice startling Mary. "Oh, my," she said, sending the bird a nervous glance. "Sorry," Eva said. Mary continued on her way, disappearing through the silver doors, while Eva stood in place. Her mind was still searching for answers to what she'd seen earlier, but she must have been mistaken. There was probably no figure. It was likely her overactive imagination at work once again. Goodness, she wanted a case so badly she was making things up. Turning to Poirot, Eva decided to cave and give him an almond for being such a good bird while she talked. Well, mostly. She spent a few minutes talking to him, having him do tricks so he could earn his treats. Then she stifled a yawn, knowing it was past time for her to go home. She was just putting the almonds away when a scream rent the air. Chapter 6.
Eva knew the sound had to be coming from the second or third floor, though she couldn't be sure which. Then again, it seemed as if Miss Grant had only just left. Had she exited to something scary on her floor? Rather than take the elevator, Eva rushed up the stairs to the second floor, hoping Mr. Manx hadn't been disturbed by the scream. When she came out onto the second floor, she looked around. Mary's room was to the left, and Rosalie's to the right. Where had the sound come from? She paused to listen, hoping what she'd heard could be explained away as a nightmare or even a spider sighting. Then the woman screamed again, and it was clearly coming from the right. She rushed to the door and pounded on it. "Mrs. Weston, it's Eva Stewart, are you all right?" A few moments later, the door flew open. Rosalie stood there in cotton pajamas with candy canes on them and a look of absolute terror on her pale features. Her hand shook as she reached out to Eva, as if needing help standing. "Mrs. Weston, are you okay?" Eva tried again, hoping her words might jolt the woman from her catatonic state. She... Rosalie blinked and shook her head as if trying to collect herself. "There was someone down in the courtyard. A ghost." Her grip tightened. Eva blinked. A ghost? She hadn't expected that. "Come see," Rosalie said, pulling Eva in with more force than Eva had expected from the thin woman. "Look." Rosalie jammed a finger toward the backyard and pool area. It was empty except for the furniture that was neatly stacked to the side. The bistro lights on a timer had gone off while Eva was talking with Mary downstairs, but there were dim lights that illuminated the path to her cottage. While the pool was heated, not many took part in swimming during the slightly cooler months. Could it have been Mr. Banks? Had he decided to swim so late at night? It was there," Rosalie said. "I promise you it was." "Why don't we have a seat?" Eva placed a hand on her shoulder. "Can I get you a bottle of water, perhaps?" Rosalie looked as if she were in shock, but she nodded, allowing Eva to guide her to the cushioned chair. Once Rosalie was comfortable, Eva went to the mini-fridge and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water that she'd made sure Elena added to the room after the incident the other day. "There you go," Eva said in her most soothing tone. "Take deep breaths. It's okay." The woman quickly calmed down, but then she turned desperate eyes to Eva. "I'm not crazy," she said, sipping the water again. "I promise you, I saw something. It looked like... No, it couldn't have been." Eva offered a kind smile, though she had no idea what the woman was saying. "I'm sure you saw something." Eva imagined a white parrot or even a white cat scurrying through her backyard as the reason for the woman's unease. "Were you sleeping, maybe?" "No!" Her response was indignant, but then her features softened. "I'm sorry, Eva. Is it all right if I call you that?" "Yes, of course." "I'm a lot of things," Rosalie said, sniffing dramatically and tossing her hair over her shoulder. "But I'm not a lunatic or a sleepwalker." "I didn't say..." "Your look is doing all the talking," Rosalie said, in her first sign of down-to-earth humor. "I saw something. Someone. I don't know what, though. I wasn't able to fall asleep, and a light or something flashed in my window. It drew me to look outside, and, well, that's when I saw her." There was something in the woman's tone and how she almost dropped the last word off that drew Ava's curiosity. Was that familiarity? "Did you recognize the person you saw? You said her like you knew who it was." "What? No, not really." Her denial was much too quick. "I mean, it looked like a ghost." "I'm sorry, but I don't believe in ghosts." "Neither do I," Rosalie said with a mirthless laugh. "But what I saw, it couldn't be possible." Rosalie had recognized the person she saw. Eva was certain of that. But if so, why not admit that? Was it someone she didn't want to see? Someone from the media trying to get shots of her on vacation? Eva had heard of stranger things happening. "Then please describe what you saw to me," Eva said gently. She wasn't sure why, but she felt if the woman talked about it, it could help. It would at least give her something to look for on the exterior cameras in the morning. Someone, in a light frilly nightgown that tied in the front, and bunny slippers. I know it sounds crazy, but it looked like she was kind of floating across the backyard." "The pool?" "No, just around the edge of the pool." "Did she go into my cottage?" she asked, curious as to how far the woman might go.
No, I mean, I screamed and ran away from the window, then you came in. She looked sheepish, but shrugged it off as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I suppose I do sound crazy, but you don't leave chocolates in the rooms, do you? The drastic change in topics made Ava's head spin. No. Do you want me to get you something from the kitchen? No. Rosalie shook her head, then pointed to the dresser. Much like the flowers I got that box of chocolates this morning on my pillow. Your maids, she began, but perhaps it was the look on Ava's face that made her stop what she was going to say. Either way, silence descended. Ava was growing concerned about the woman. Was it like Mary said? Was Rosalie buying things for herself and blaming it on someone else? It seemed odd, but what reason would she have to lie? And honestly, Ava didn't think she was lying. Was there a card? Ava asked the first question that came to mind. I didn't look. I just threw them in the trash. Ava glanced toward the trash, but it was clear Elena had already taken the trash out. Well, I'm not sure what to tell you, Mrs. Weston. I will check our cameras for any sign of She almost said being, but changed her mind. I'll see if there was a person out there. We'll get to the bottom of this. If nothing else, it was likely a prank. The doors are all locked, and there's no way anyone can get up here. Though even as she said it, Ava had to wonder about the chocolates and flowers. Was it possible someone had breached their security? Rosalie looked as if she might argue with her, but then pressed her lips together and nodded. Thank you for coming. And for the water. She shrugged her shoulders. I'm sure I'm not an easy guest to deal with. Nonsense, Ava said, standing up and sensing that it was about time for her to leave. You are wonderful. Now let's close these curtains and you can get back to bed. As Ava closed the curtains to make sure no light would climb in early that morning, she let her eyes wander the backyard. Nothing seemed out of place, but she would check on the way to her room. Thank you, Rosalie said again, this time taking Ava's hand and squeezing it. I'm glad you were here to talk with. Any time, she told the woman. As she quietly closed the door behind her, she turned to see Mary in the hallway with her hand on the door. The sight startled her, but she put on a smile, though the woman wore a frozen expression. Miss Stewart. Did you hear the screams? Ava asked. Oh, yes, the screams, she admitted, looking flustered. I was just coming out to see what had happened. Is everything all right? Ava gauged what she should tell the woman. Not only was she writing a memoir about Rosalie, she was just another guest to Ava. She had long since coached all of her staff to treat everything with the utmost delicacy when it came to discussing guests. She didn't like the idea of gossip, certainly not from herself or her staff to another guest. Yes, everything's fine, Ava said, wanting to offer something more to curb the woman's curiosity, but knowing less was more in this type of situation. She forced a smile she didn't feel and left it at that, turning toward the door. Do I need to check in on Mrs. Weston? Mary asked. Ava wasn't sure if it was a leading question or not, but rather than answer, she merely said, Good night, and slipped into the elevator, where the door dinged just in time. The mention of a ghost-like creature in her backyard wasn't as concerning as many might think it should be. First, Ava had installed cameras in most of the main areas in order to protect herself. They had proved mostly helpful in the last few months, especially when her bed and breakfast had been burglarized and her safe had been tampered with. Still, it was odd. While there were ghost tours in Key West and many believed that some houses were haunted, Ava was not one to believe something like that. Still, it had appeared that once she'd calmed down, Rosalie hadn't appeared drunk or overly paranoid or any other kind of symptom that might cause hallucinations. If she were telling the truth, Ava was certain the culprit was not of the supernatural world, but someone from their own. The main question was whether they were trying to scare Mrs. Weston, and if so, why now? Or had Ava done something to draw the attention of someone interested in harming her business with haunting stories? Rather than obsess over it that night, though, Ava made sure everything was cleared away for the morning. The security system was set, and she had a solid umbrella in hand just in case someone decided to jump out of the shadows toward her. She was certainly going to defend herself. But the walk back to her cottage was uneventful, and she got inside her home without incident. In fact, she'd even taken a flashlight outside to look around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary and no sign that anyone, ghost or not, had been in the backyard. Readying for bed, Ava climbed beneath the covers and pulled out a book to read. The perfect way to unwind after the strange day she'd had. The next morning dawned bright with a stiff wind that offered a slightly deeper chill when you were in the shade. Eva made good use of her Thursday morning by catching up on emails, as well as answering questions that had piled up in her inbox. It was a tedious chore, but she always felt better when it was done. When the more mundane tasks were finished, she switched to writing out her staff holiday cards. It was a tradition she'd started her first year as owner of the Keys. She would hand-pick Christmas cards for each member of her staff and write them an encouraging note wishing them well during the season. She enjoyed the feel of real paper and pen as opposed to typing or email at times. For things like holidays and special occasions, she always tried to write out her gratitude and thankfulness whenever possible. On her third card of the morning, she was startled, thankfully with her pen in the air, by the bell above the door. It had been unusually quiet with only Rosalie, Mary, and now Tim under the roof. Even Anton had noted that it was odd cooking only enough for their small staff and few guests. When she looked up, she met the confident gaze of a tall, handsome man who looked to be in his mid-30s. He had bright blonde hair and a charismatic smile. She immediately thought of a salesman and wondered what he might try to sell to her. Whatever it was, she didn't need it. "Hi," he said, walking straight up to her with a bold stride. "Hello, how may I help you? I'd like a room." She blinked. Having walk-ins was not uncommon, but she only had a small sign out front, not much advertisement except for her online presence, which said she was closed for the holidays. "I'm sorry, but we've closed our reservations for the holidays. Are you hoping to book after the first of the year?" A light crease furrowed his brow. "My name is Matt Jeffers." He paused as if Eva might know him, then rushed on. "I'm Rosalie Weston's agent." "Oh," Eva said, realizing she did know who he was then, though only by his connection to her guest. She had a brief memory of the woman's terrified expression from the night before. "I realize you've closed up for the season, but you are hosting my client, and I'm afraid this is a bit of an emergency." It was Eva's turn to frown. Had Rosalie called him? Where was he from that he was able to get a flight so quickly? "I'm sure you can make an exception," he continued, since Eva had remained mute. I'm sorry, emergency?" She remembered Rosalie claiming she'd seen a ghost. This couldn't be about that. "I'm here to provide some support, if you will, to her. She's in a delicate season of her career with a new, very big movie launching soon, and I want to make sure she's at her best." Only then did Eva see the newspaper tucked under his arm. She hadn't bothered to look that morning since she'd jumped right into work. Was it possible there was something about Rosalie in the paper? Then Eva realized Mr. Jeffers had completely avoided her question. Still, was there any harm in having him stay? They did have the space, even if she didn't like the idea of causing more work for her crew, who had been assured a lighter load until after the new year. "And she knows you're coming?" He hesitated just long enough for Eva to ascertain the truth. No, Rosalie didn't know, and yet he was still here. Could she refuse him based on that? "I assure you she'll be happy to see me. We have a great working relationship." He made sure to put emphasis on working so Eva would know there was nothing untoward going on, something she appreciated. "I suppose I could offer you a room. How long will you be staying?" He looked relieved. "Thank you. I will stay as long as she needs me." More vague answers, but they made arrangements, and she handed him a key to the teal room on the bottom floor. Watching him with his designer luggage and determined attitude, she wondered if she'd done the right thing. Would Mary see his arrival as an attack on her process? Then again, was Rosalie really struggling so much that she needed her agent here to manage her reaction to the strange things she suggested were happening? There were too many questions for Eva to answer, so she put them aside and fed Poirot. After spending a bit of time talking with him, she left the front desk to Jake and went to spend more time in her cottage. She'd already finished the book for the murder mystery book club the next night, but she needed to come up with a few discussion questions. She'd considered asking Mary to join as a speaker for that night's meeting, but at the last moment she'd changed her mind. The Christmas party, held there at the bed and breakfast, would be just as good, if not a better, opportunity for people to talk with the memoir writer. It would also mean that Mary wasn't put on the spot and that she could enjoy the party too. Something Eva assumed a recluse would appreciate. Eva had already invited the rest of her guests, as was only fair since she would be taking up all of the main floor space, but none had chosen to reply yet. If Mary came, she would certainly be a guest of honor, though, especially among their bookish group. With a self-satisfied smile, Eva turned on her gas fireplace and pulled up a blanket with her notepad and pen, working on the questions for the meeting. It was a busy time, but not nearly as busy as when they were on the case of a murderer. During this holiday season, it seemed appropriate. Still, her mind went back to Jacques Aubert. Eva put the notepad down and wondered if Jerome had questioned the man. Had he gotten anything from him? The last time he'd tried to talk with him, there had been some residual confusion from the poison, and she'd not heard when he was going back to chat with him. Sighing, she forced herself to refocus on the task at hand. She had a murder mystery book club to prepare for. Chapter 7. Are you running late? Eva stepped away from the murder mystery book club, the chatter almost too loud to hear Jerome over. Like, really late? They'd had what she'd call a productive discussion about that week's book, but the conversation had started to dwindle, which usually meant it was time to wrap it up. That's when she'd gotten Jerome's call. About that. Jerome sounded distracted, and she heard talking in the background. Then something spoken over a loudspeaker. Are you at the hospital? Her pulse spiked. Was he all right? Yeah, he said, still distracted. Are you okay? Her voice was pinched, and she couldn't help the worry that laced her tone. What? Oh, I'm fine. He sounded as if he was walking. Hey, I'm sorry to call like this. I thought you guys might be on dessert by now. We're getting close, she admitted, some of her worry ebbing at his normal topic of conversation. That's better. The noise dropped out behind him. I am at the hospital, but it's because I was told Mr. Aubert was ready to be interviewed. Only when I got here, he was gone. Gone? Eva said, her surprise evident. Yep. Looks like I won't be making the meeting tonight. I understand. You're going to look for him? I would, but we have no leads on who poisoned him, or why for that matter, and I just had another robbery case dropped into my lap. I'm sorry to hear that. Me too. I just hope Mr. Aubert is somewhere safe. Did they say he was stable to leave? Jerome let out a sigh. They were prepared to release him, so yes, but I can't figure out why he left early. The only reason Eva could think of was the fact that the man might not have wanted to talk to the police. But that was purely speculation. I think it's time for dessert, Willard said, loud enough for Jerome to hear. I'll let you go, Jerome said with a chuckle. Okay, I'm sorry, Eva said. Don't be. It happens. Good luck with the club. He hung up and she moved back toward the warmth of the outdoor heaters that glowed above the book club's grouping of chairs. Talk among yourselves, I'll be right back. Eva headed for the door, but Kay jumped up and trailed her. I'll help. And me, Geraldine said. Her sparkling eyes narrowed. You owe me some information. Eva rolled her eyes at the older woman. She was like a bloodhound able to smell news from a great distance. Eva led the way to the kitchen, the woman trailing her. She'd asked Anton to create many creme brulees for their meeting that night, and 2 rows of trays sat ready in the refrigerator for their berry topping. Will you grab the berry compote, Kay? Eva asked as she pulled out the second tray and reached for a spoon. Here you are, Kay said. Eva handed them each a spoon, and they got to work dishing out the topping. Well, Geraldine said. There's nothing to share, Eva said, her focus on the desserts. Hogwash! Geraldine, Kay said, giving her a wide-eyed stare. You're so grouchy tonight, and it's getting close to Christmas. What would St. Nick say? Geraldine gave a grunt and wagged her spoon toward Kay. He'd say I have a right to be grouchy when my friend is withholding information. But I'm not really. Not much has happened with the case, and— Wait, what case? Kay asked. It was her turn to stop spooning and look between Eva and Geraldine. Not much? So there is something. Geraldine's eyes sparkled. Oh, my, Eva said, narrowing her eyes at the women. Eva quickly told Kay about the poisoning and how nothing had come from it, especially now that the man was missing. Then she mentioned the small parts about the odd happenings at the bed and breakfast, but how none of that really added up to anything. By that time they were done with the desserts, so the women carried them out to the porch. Ava's been withholding, Kay said when they entered the fray of disjointed conversations. Her words acted like a ringing bell, drawing everyone's attention. Kay! Ava's jaw dropped at her friend. Then again, had she really expected the woman to keep the news to herself? Okay, let's hear it, Elijah said, reaching for a small dish of the dessert with a grin. You know you can't keep this from us. There's nothing to keep, Eva insisted, offering the desserts to everyone around the circle. Plus, it wouldn't be right for me to share without Jerome's okay.
It felt like a flimsy excuse. "Oh, Ava," Kay said, shaking her head. Ava let out a sigh and gave in, offering everyone the same minimal information. "See?" she said when she was done. "Nothing. There is no case. Nothing aside from a poisoning that could have been for any number of reasons. Then there have been odd things happening around here. 2 unrelated things that tempt us sleuths to dig deeper when in reality it's nothing." She almost convinced herself that time. "Poison isn't nothing," Pete said, licking his spoon clean. "It is odd, I'll give you that," Ava admitted. "And you forget, they might be connected," Geraldine said, lowering her voice. "That photo looked like your guest." "She said it wasn't her. And you believed her?" Elijah said. Ava opened her mouth, but had to admit he had a good point. She hadn't fully believed the woman. She hated to say that out loud, though, just in case she was listening, but there had been too much familiarity about it all. And yet, what were the odds? "You need our help," Elijah said. Sarah, who had been quiet up until then, finally spoke up. "Why don't we give her our help when she asks for it?" "Oh, come now," Geraldine said, tossing her hand at the young woman. "Ava never asks. We'd be waiting a long time if that were the case." Ava managed to smile. Her friend wasn't wrong. "I just think there's too much up in the air to mobilize you all for this right now. Yes, there have been some strange things happening." She thought of the person wearing a filmy nightgown crossing the backyard as Rosalie had claimed. "But there's no reason for me to make much of it." In all reality, especially after her agent arrived, she was fairly certain that Rosalie Weston had something going on that she wasn't being upfront about. Perhaps a bout with mental illness or some type of paranoia. It was the only, and best, explanation for what the woman was claiming. Flowers that no one had delivered, chocolates, seeing a ghost. No, there were explanations for those things, and if not readily available, then they had to be the product of a troubled mind. Was that what Mary was after? Documenting Rosalie's fall from fame? "Ava?" Vicky said, reaching across to rest her hand on Ava's arm. "Sorry." She forced a smile. "I was in another world." "And?" Vicky said, knowing that there was more than what Ava was saying. "I will say some strange things have happened, but there's nothing quantifiable and definitely nothing specifically dangerous that this group should be interested in. But if there is—" "You mean when?" Geraldine said with a wink. "If," Ava reiterated, "I will be sure to mention it." "This is delicious, Ava," Willard said, drawing everyone's attention as he finished off his dessert and reached for another. "No, you don't," Geraldine said, rescuing the last dessert from his grasp and handing it to Ava. "You can't steal Ava's portion." Everyone laughed, and the conversation turned to their Christmas party scheduled for the next week. Ava had already doled out most of the things she needed help with, but everyone made sure she wasn't taking on too much herself, something she was grateful for. With the additional guests, it was becoming more of a reality that she would be busier than she'd originally thought, but not to the point that she couldn't handle her commitments. "We better get going," Kay finally said, standing up and offering Pete a hand out of the cushy love seat they'd shared. "Thank you for tonight," Pete said. "Have you thought more about inviting Mary to our party?" Ava tried and failed to hide her smile. "Actually, I've invited all of the guests, including Mary." "Did she respond?" "Not yet, but there's hope." Pete looked extremely happy as they left, and she said goodbye to the rest of the group, except for Vicky, who stayed behind to help clean up. "Is what you said true? There's nothing to the things that have been going on here?" Vicky asked. Ava considered her friend as a cool breeze blew past, interrupting the warmth from the overhead heater. "I think it's nothing to worry about. I mean, yes, odd things have been happening, but I don't know that I can pinpoint them on anything other than some unstable tendencies of my guests." She cringed at how the words sounded. She didn't like putting her guests down or speaking ill of them, but this wasn't so much that as it was reality. "It is odd," Vicky said, pulling the curtain aside to look out toward the pool. "I mean, do you have your own ghost of Christmas past or present or whatever?" Ava laughed and rolled her eyes. "Why would I? I mean, there's nothing going on around here that, to my knowledge, would warrant that. Except for a reclusive writer working on a famous actress's memoir, then all of a sudden her agent shows up for so-called moral support. Doesn't that sound odd to you?" "Hollywood can be strange," Ava muttered. "Isn't that the truth?" Vicky nodded. "Have you seen the papers?" "No."
Eva paused from where she was stacking the dessert cups. Is it bad?
Let's just say someone leaked Rosalie's history with a psychologist, which put her in, how shall I say, not the best light.
Is there any mention she's here?
Not that I've seen.
Eva relaxed slightly at that, but her heart went out to Rosalie. It must be terrible to be a celebrity and have any part of your background revealed for all to know.
Let me grab the coffee pot,
Vicky said.
That,
Eva began when a scream filled the air.
That sounded like it came from inside,
Vicky said, dropping the pot with a loud clatter to the wooden coffee table. Eva nodded and deposited the tray next to the pot, motioning for Vicky to follow her inside. Was it possible something else had happened? And if so, would Eva learn her lesson and close her bed and breakfast for the holidays next year? As Eva and Vicky rushed inside, the soft glow of the Christmas tree illuminated the space where two people were facing off. One was Rosalie, dressed in the same candy cane pajamas with a thick robe over the top. The other person was the new guest from the day before, Tim Banks. They stood there, facing one another, and Eva almost felt like she'd walked into something she shouldn't have. Then Tim, seemingly drawn from his frozen state, shook his head and rushed toward the downstairs door. She thought she heard him mutter he was sorry, but then he was gone. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to shatter Rosalie from her state as well.
"How? Where did he come from? Where?"
Rosalie gasped, clutching the thick robe at her chest. As if torn from her focus on Tim, she jerked her attention to Eva.
"Where? How are they all back?"
Eva narrowed her eyes. "Mrs. Weston, is there something we can do for you?" Did her two guests know one another? Rosalie only had eyes for Eva.
"Where?"
she demanded again. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable discussing other guests with you. Is there something I can do to help? You seem distressed."
"Distressed?"
She let out what Eva would describe as a maniacal laugh and shook her head.
"Yes, I'm distressed. He shouldn't be here. He can't be. It's not possible."
She tipped her head, running a hand through her hair and clenching her fingers into a fist, as if trying to pull the answers, as well as her hair, from the roots. Eva looked to Vicky as if to ask what she should do with the woman who was clearly having some sort of breakdown. Vicky shrugged her shoulders, indicating she had no idea either, but both women didn't move.
I came here, and the woman, how is this all possible?"
"Mrs. Weston," Eva tried again, taking a step toward the woman who wasn't making any sense.
"No!"
Rosalie shouted back at Eva, then clutched her arms around herself.
"I'm sorry. I don't—"
"Can I call someone for you? Perhaps your manager?"
"My manager?"
"Agent," Eva corrected herself, not sure what the difference was.
"Oh,
Yes, you could call him. Maybe Matt will know how he's here. He shouldn't be here." She said the last part to herself, and Eva had to admit it sounded as if the woman was losing her mind. "Hold on, Mrs. Weston." Eva moved toward the desk to call up to Matt's room, while Vicky slowly approached the woman. She held her hands out as if Rosalie was a deer who might skitter away at a moment's notice. "It's okay, Mrs. Weston," Vicky said, finally reaching her and resting a hand on her arm. "Why don't you have a seat? Could I make you some tea?" "Tea?" Rosalie said, her voice as small as a child's. "That might be nice. Okay, why don't I do that?" Rosalie allowed herself to be guided to a seat, though Eva didn't miss the way she swayed. Apparently Vicky noticed as well, because she made eye contact with Eva and mouthed, "Something's wrong." Eva wanted to laugh and say, "Oh, really?" but her sarcasm wouldn't help in this situation. Instead, she motioned for Vicky to go make the tea. Vicky nodded and headed to the kitchen to make the tea at the automatic hot water spout. Hello, Mr. Jeffers?" "Yes." He sounded like he'd accepted a business call, but she was thankful it meant he was awake at least. "I have Mrs. Weston down here, and she's had a bit of an—" Eva searched for the word. "Episode?" "Well, she's upset," she said finally. "Oh? What's wrong?" "Honestly, I'm not sure," Eva said, looking back at the woman who was muttering to herself, but too quietly for Eva to hear. "She saw someone, one of my guests, and he seems to have upset her." "Do I need to call the police?"
Oh, no, I don't think he actually said or did anything, at least not that I saw. Eva looked back at the woman who looked somehow frail in the robe. I think it would be best if you could come down. Yes, of course, I'll be right there. They disconnected just as Vicky was coming back in with a cup of hot water, honey, and a few tea bags on a small service tray. Here you are, Mrs. Weston, Vicky said. Do you like peppermint? Yes. Rosalie blinked several times and looked between them. I'm sorry. I haven't been myself lately. Vicky dropped the tea bag into the mug. Rosalie added honey just as the elevator door opened and Matt Jeffers walked in. Oh, Rosalie, what is going on? Rosalie looked up and Eva caught tears in the woman's eyes. I don't know how he's here. Shh, Matt said, placing an arm around her as he kneeled next to her chair. It's going to be all right. Why don't I help you up to your room so you can rest? Thank you. He helped her stand, then took the tray as she gently wove her arm through his. Eva and Vicky watched as they went to the elevator. After they stepped inside, Matt nodded once at Eva before the doors closed. That was odd, Vicky said. I know, Eva agreed. I need to talk to my other guest, but I don't know if she mistook him for someone else or what's going on. I mean, she's been seeing things, Vicky. Vicky bit her lip. Is it possible she's losing it? Eva made a face. I suppose anything is possible. Part of me wants to ask Mary if she's noticed anything during their interview times. Wouldn't you think that sort of thing would come out during conversation? Oh, yes. Vicky nodded her agreement. If it's something like dementia, which she does seem still a bit too young for, you'd be able to tell. Not all the time, but during episodes like this. Eva slowly shook her head. Still, she truly seemed to see my guest as someone she knows. I didn't get a good look at his face, but did you notice anything? Maybe recognition, but it's possible that it's from her movies or something. Possible, but... Eva trailed off, remembering what Tim had said. He said he won the trip here. Do you think there's something suspect about that? You think this is all a setup? Of who? Rosalie Weston? What would be the point? From what I understand... Eva snuck a glance at the closed elevator doors. Well, she's a bit of a has-been. Vicky merely shrugged. I'm beginning to think there's more going on here than what I'd originally thought. Are you regretting sending the club home early? Vicky said with a half grin. No, not yet, but I do think it's time I started doing digging of my own. There it is, Vicky said. What, that intrepid spirit? I knew the holidays couldn't keep it at bay forever. Eva merely smiled back at her friend, but her mind was racing. There were far more things happening than she'd originally thought, and it was time she figured out what was going on. Chapter 8. Eva allowed herself some extra sleep the next day, rolling out of bed and toward the coffee machine just before 9 the next morning. It was very late for her, but she'd made sure Anton had everything he needed, including additional help from Sarah. Eva hadn't planned on it, but she'd started researching more deeply into Rosalie Weston's background after the incident in the main lobby. She'd gone down several rabbit holes and ended up not climbing into bed until well past midnight. What she'd found was nothing a first-rate or perhaps even a second- or third-rate journalist wouldn't have uncovered from news media sites and interviews the woman had done. Nonetheless, it had enlightened Eva to learn some of the woman's history and background. She'd grown up near Washington, D.C., and had gotten her big break when she was a senior in high school. She'd gone on to have decent fame from that first movie, and done several others in the same vein before slipping into an acting slump. But as her agent had said when he'd arrived, she was on the verge of something big. She'd been cast in the remake of her first big movie as her grown-up self. Filming was set to begin in the new year. It was odd, though. The woman Eva and Vicky had tended to last night was in no condition to act, let alone star in another movie anytime soon. Eva couldn't help wondering if that was Rosalie's true state, or had something happened to make her that way. Was it possible she'd thought that Tim Banks was someone else? Eva had noticed that the woman's behavior had changed, though subtly. She seemed more on edge, paranoid almost, and the fact that she'd claimed to see a ghost didn't bode well for her either. More than anything, Eva wanted to have a conversation with her other guest, Mr. Banks. She needed to know if he understood any of what was going on with Mrs. Weston, or if he was as much an observer as she and Vicky had been. Either way, despite the slightly busier than anticipated holiday season, Eva wanted to get to the bottom of the strange things that were happening at the Keys. After her coffee and a quick bowl of cereal, Eva dressed in leggings and an oversized sweater. She pinned one side of her hair up with a silver clip that read "Joy to the World," then tied a scarf around her neck before heading off to the main building. She waved hello to Jake at the front desk and made her way to the kitchen. She'd already asked Anton to cater the party for her, something he'd been so excited to do, but she wanted to go over the food list one more time just to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. She'd placed a bulk order for many of the supplies he'd asked for, but there were a few things she had promised to pick up for him. When she walked into the kitchen, she paused at the sound of voices. It sounded like Sarah and Anton in the back somewhere. Sarah, if it was her, was giggling like a schoolgirl, and Anton was egging her on. Something twisted in Eva's chest. Of course she was happy for her almost relative. The young woman had been through so much and came from a bit of a torrid past. At the same time, Eva was also worried about one of her favorite workers. Anton was creative and very talented when it came to the culinary arts. He'd found a safe haven at the Keys Bed and Breakfast to hone his craft and experiment with various recipes. But was it possible he was getting distracted by Sarah? Or worse, that she would possibly break his heart? It was an odd thing to think of, especially since they were both adults and didn't need her meddling, but Sarah had made it clear to Eva that she had come for Eva's help. She was interested in finding the person who had killed Sal, and she had planned to leave to do that very thing when the time was right. Of course, she'd also implied that she wanted Eva to help her investigate. Either way, it was clear to Eva now that Sarah and Anton were moving quickly toward becoming more than just co-workers. Was it possible they might even start dating? And then what would happen when Sarah left, as she said she would? A sudden worry of being found in the kitchen without announcing her presence jerked Eva out of her thoughts, and she called out, "Hello, Anton!" He popped his head out from the other room and waved. "Hey, Miss S, be right there. Sarah's helping Anton with the end-of-the-year inventory." He disappeared around the corner and Sarah let out another giggle before they both appeared in front of Eva. Did Sarah's hair look a little mussed? Eva chastised herself for thinking the worst of them and refocused her attention on the tasks at hand. She could deal with other things later, perhaps in the new year. Surely Sarah wouldn't plan to leave before that. After she and Anton figured out the rest of the shopping, Sarah offered to do it for Eva. While she was tempted to say no and do it herself, she knew it was wise to take advantage of Sarah's offer. She could use the free time to make a call on Mr. Banks. After checking in at the front desk and chatting with Jake for a few minutes, Eva made her way to Tim's room and knocked. She waited, but heard nothing inside. Then, just as she was about to give up, he opened the door a crack. Yes." "Hello, Mr. Banks," Eva said, noting that it appeared as if the man hadn't slept much the night before. "I was just wondering if I could have a word with you about what happened last night." He looked taken aback, and Eva wondered if he had just woken up. A quick glance at her wrist showed her it was nearing 11:30. I don't know." His response was surprising. For a moment, Eva didn't know what to say. Finally, collecting her thoughts, she took a deep breath and tried a different approach. "What I walked into last night looked more personal. I don't want to pry, and yet when I have two guests staying at my bed and breakfast and there are issues, I like to be kept in the know so I can best handle the situation. I'm sure you understand." His eyes narrowed, but he nodded once. "So I need to ask if there is any kind of issue between you and Mrs. Weston that I need to be prepared for. She seemed very unsettled last night." He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking back into the room as if looking for something to help him through the conversation. Finally, he turned back to Eva. "There are some things that might be good for you to know, but I am expecting a call from work. Could I talk with you later? Tonight, perhaps?" A software emergency. It was possible, but Eva felt as if he was stalling for time. And yet what recourse did she have? She wasn't anything more than his hostess, and certainly not the police. "All right, Mr. Banks, if that's what you'd prefer. But I do ask that you watch out for any more encounters with Mrs. Weston until we can talk." "Well, you don't have anything to worry about. I'll be right here, all day." She wanted to point out that he wasn't under house arrest or anything like that, but he moved to close the door and Eva lost her chance. Still, it was an odd encounter. He'd never fully opened the door to her or given an excuse for Rosalie's behavior the night before. What's worse, it seemed as if he had some sort of explanation. Why wouldn't he just tell her what was going on? Eva sighed and walked down the hallway. Hopefully she'd understand more that evening when they talked. Until then, Eva was going to work on adding a few more Christmas decorations to the main floor to make the day of the party easier on herself. Besides, there was nothing better than hanging Christmas decorations while listening to Frank Sinatra on a blustery day. Eva set to work pulling out more boxes from the storage closet behind the front desk. Untangling balls of Christmas lights, she considered what she'd already hung out front. It might be nice to add a few strands of lights to the underside of the porch. Grabbing the small stepladder that also stayed in the storage closet, she headed outside, thankful that she'd put on an extra layer with her jacket. Within minutes, she was busy stringing the lights back and forth in a meandering pattern. When she was halfway through, she paused to try the next strand of lights, only to find they were dead. She hurried inside, grabbing an extra box of lights from the previous year, but just as she was heading back outside, a figure across the street caught her attention. The front of the bed and breakfast was somewhat shrouded by palm trees and large-leafed vegetation, but there was a clear path to see across the street. The day being somewhat cloudy and a little chilly for Key West, there weren't many people outside. It's why she caught sight of the man in the first place. He wore a dark jacket with the hood pulled up against the wind, but he hadn't moved since she'd first gone out to hang up the lights. From her vantage point, she could see him, but she was fairly certain he couldn't see her, yet. She studied his face and knew without too much scrutiny that it was Jacques Aubert, the man who had been poisoned. At first, she second-guessed herself. After all, she'd only seen his image from his passport, but when he turned to look up the street, she could see more of his face. It was definitely him. Why would he leave the hospital and come to her bed and breakfast? A chill skittered up her back and caused her to drop the lights. Up until that point, she hadn't connected the poisoning with her bed and breakfast, at least not with any certainty. Sure, he'd had a photo in his wallet that looked like a younger version of the famed memoir writer who happened to be staying at the Keys, but it was all conjecture. Besides, Mary had disputed that it was her or that she'd known Jacques. But he was here now. What was that about? "Eva?" Jake said, coming back from the restroom to find her standing in front of the door, lights on the ground not moving. "What's going on?" She frowned. What was going on? I'm not sure. Then, with a determination that she knew Jerome wouldn't like because it could be construed as reckless, she put the lights down and made her way outside. The man could stand there across the street all he wanted to, but that didn't stop her from going up to him to see what he was doing there. Besides, she had a feeling Jake was going to be watching her. Marching down the sidewalk, Eva reached the gate and pulled it open. But just at that moment, Jacques looked across and saw her coming. His eyes widened, and he immediately ran. Eva gasped as she watched him go. Had he been afraid of her seeing him? How could he even know who she was or that she was coming to talk to him? Or was it something else? She turned around, noticing that the front of the bed and breakfast remained unchanged from when she'd first gone out to hang the lights. Sighing, Eva made her way back up the steps, pulling her phone from her pocket. She'd call Jerome and tell him she'd seen Mr. Aubert, then she'd finish hanging the lights. The lights Jake was now holding out to her, his gaze asking what she was up to. She dodged his questions, assuring him he could go back inside, and then call Jerome. When she got his voicemail, she only left a message for him to call her back. She needed to find out what was going on, and if it had something to do with Rosalie Weston and her apparent slip from reality. Or was there more at stake here that Eva couldn't see? A poisoned man, a woman on the brink of insanity, an agent running media interference, and a reclusive writer at the heart of it all. At least that night she'd get some answers from Tim. Eva made pasta in her small cottage and enjoyed a glass of red wine with it. Then, as evening neared, she prepared herself to go back to the main area of the bed and breakfast to have a talk with Tim. He'd left a note at the front desk that afternoon promising a chat, but not until 7 that evening. Jake had taken the message, mentioning the man had left it on his way out. So, he hadn't stayed put like he'd said?
What did he have to say? As she pulled her sweater back on, along with her scarf for extra warmth, a pounding came to her door. She rushed toward it and pulled it open to reveal Bas. His natural tanned complexion looked white, and she wondered what was wrong. "Bas, what is it?"
There's a man in the pool."
At first, Eva wasn't sure what that had to do with her. They kept the pool heated in the winter months and nice and chilly in the summer, but no one tended to swim this close to Christmas, at least not at night. "In the pool? What do you mean?" she said, asking for clarification.
"Yes, please come quick."
His tone made it clear he didn't mean the man was swimming. Eva rushed out of her cottage to the edge of the pool. What she saw there froze her thoroughly. Tim Banks lay face down in the water, and he wasn't moving. "My phone!" She threw a hand back toward her small apartment, and Bas rushed in, coming back seconds later with her phone. "Quick, try to reach him with the pool net." Bas understood as she put in the call to 911, then waited as Bas maneuvered the body toward the side of the pool. The limbs looked stiff, something Eva mentally took note of. When she was put through to the dispatcher and explained her situation, the woman on the other end assured her that they'd send an ambulance and a detective within minutes. Eva was asked to stay on the line, but she knelt next to the edge of the pool when Tim's body was close enough. She wanted to reach for a pulse, though she knew there wouldn't be one. She shook her head, and Bas crossed himself, uttering a prayer in Spanish. Then they waited. It felt much longer than it actually took for the ambulance to get there, but soon 2 men and a woman came rushing along the path at the side of the house. They slowed when she shook her head, meaning he was gone, but they went about their job. Moments later, Jerome came around the side of the house.
"Eva, what's going on?"
Well, Bas found him in the water. I don't know." He looked over at the body.
"Who?"
"A guest named Tim Banks, a software engineer from Texas." The details felt trivial, but it was all she had. Just as she said his name, a scream came from the back porch, and they looked up to see Rosalie there. She hadn't changed from the pajamas Eva had seen her in the day before, or perhaps she'd put them back on, and she still wore the same robe. By the state of her hair, Eva assumed she'd just woken up. Then Mary appeared behind her, and Matt behind her, all guests staring wide-eyed at the scene by the poolside. "Come on," Matt said, placing an arm around Rosalie. While he directed her back inside, Mary made her way down the steps toward Eva and Jerome. "What's going on?" she said, looking between them and the EMTs who had been joined by 2 officers, one speaking to Bas in Spanish.
You'll need to go back inside. We'll question you soon, but this is an active crime scene."
Mary's eyes widened, and she took a few steps back. Just then, the EMTs pulled the body from the water, and she gasped, her hand going to her throat. It was odd, though, because as Eva watched, it wasn't so much sadness as it was fascination she saw in the woman's face. Almost as if she was considering how to spin a story, not looking at a dead man. And perhaps she was. "That was odd," Eva said when Mary left.
"She didn't look as disconcerted as I'd expected," Jerome agreed. "But people don't always respond to death the way we think they should."
Just then Vicky showed up. She nodded once at Eva, but walked past to the body. It was her job, and Eva wouldn't get in the way of that. "Jerome," Eva said. She turned her back away so she wouldn't have to see Vicky examining the body. "I saw Mr. Aubert today."
"What?"
"I left you a message to call me, but you must not have gotten it." He shook his head.
"Sorry."
"It's all right. I was putting up more lights outside, and there he was across the street. It was almost like he was watching the bed and breakfast."
"Watching you?"
His gaze intensified, and Eva felt her own chest constrict. Had he been watching her? I don't think. Eva thought back, the feeling of fear residing somewhat. It felt like he was watching the area, not me.
"Okay, this is very strange," Jerome said, his brow furrowing. "I mean, he couldn't have known you were involved, well, to the extent you were, so why would he be here?"
"I have no idea. I went to speak with him, but he got scared off and ran away."
"You shouldn't have approached him, Eva,"
Jerome chided her. "I was perfectly safe. Besides, wasn't he the one who got poisoned?"
"True. But you're sure it was him?"
Jerome leaned close. "Positive." Jerome looked back at Tim's body, then shook his head. Something odd is going on here, Eva, and I have no idea what it is, or what the point is.
She knew exactly what he meant, but she had no idea how to find the answer. There had been no outright crimes. Eva turned to look at Tim Banks. Well, that wasn't true anymore. Now there was at least one crime, two if you counted Mr. Aubert's poisoning. Still, before she could voice her thoughts, Vicky came up to them. I'll need to give you the autopsy results. It's inconclusive.
Because he was in the water?
Jerome asked. That and a few other things.
Eva blinked. It was odd to see Vicky not giving away details because she was there, but it was per the job's rules. She knew it and Vicky knew it, even if Jerome sometimes bent those rules. Look. He angled toward the bed and breakfast. You take him back, and I'll stay with the officers to get statements here. Do you think foul play?
Vicky hesitated. Again, something Eva wasn't used to seeing. I'm not comfortable guessing. I'm sorry, Jerome.
Okay, thanks.
She nodded once, sent Eva a look that held an apology, likely for the abruptness, and then left.
I do need to question your guests. Would you like to come?
Eva felt the swell of pride, or whatever it was, in her chest at his request. She did want to come, but would it influence her guests? Then again, she was starting to think that her guests were holding things back, and finding a dead body in her pool entitled her to a little questioning of her own. I'll come, she said, jaw jutting upward. He merely nodded, but she saw the glint of approval in his gaze before they headed toward the bed and breakfast. Chapter 9. The main room of the bed and breakfast had quickly turned into a hub of activity. Rosalie was crying in the corner while her agent Matt consoled her. Mary was pacing back and forth as if she'd rather be upstairs writing all of this down, and Bas had called Benita, who was comforting him in the corner while an officer continued to question him. Eva and Jerome stepped in, and he immediately headed toward Bas. Eva let him ask a few questions of her gardener while she busied herself making a tea service for everyone. It had been a trying evening, and while she was curious to how Tim Banks had ended up in the pool, she also knew that a comforting cup of tea and a little kindness could help everyone calm down at least somewhat. Still, as Eva brought out the tea, she found her own hands were shaking. There had been one dead body found in the alley next to the bed and breakfast earlier that year, and an older guest had been found dead in his room from what turned out to be a purposeful overdose to take him out of the picture. Now Tim had been found in the pool. While it was cold-hearted to think, Eva wondered if bad press would be the end of her business. It wasn't that she was worried, but it was a valid question. She had loyal guests who came every year, and she'd hate to see that end due to mysterious happenings. She deposited the tray in the center of the room and invited everyone to have some tea. Then she rejoined Jerome as he consulted his notes before he went to speak with the next person. "What did Bas say?" she asked, noticing that the room had gone quiet with her re-entry. Did they wonder why she was speaking with the detective? "What you'd expect. He came out to finish up some work, said he'd forgotten to adjust the pool settings. He does it religiously once a week." Jerome nodded. "He said that's when he saw the body in the water. Not much else." Jerome looked around the room, likely looking for the next person to interview. "Who should we talk to next?" Eva felt warmth flood her chest that he would ask her, then she considered how to answer. Her first choice of who to talk to would be Rosalie, but would she be up to talking? Perhaps Mary would be a better place to start. Still, there was Matt as well. She didn't know much about him, and it was possible there was something in his past that would aid them in the present. Maybe Rosalie and her agent Matt. Jerome observed them and nodded. "Sounds good. And remember, we don't have a time of death yet, so we need to establish quite a wide net for the alibis. Follow me." She nodded, her stomach twisting. She didn't have an alibi, yet Jerome seemed unconcerned. She knew her questioning would happen soon, but first they needed to focus on her guests and get them back to their rooms as quickly as possible. Eva walked beside Jerome as he moved toward Matt, who was still comforting Rosalie. He offered the woman a smile as he sat, and Eva poured a cup of tea. It looked as if the woman could use the warm beverage. "What's going on?" Rosalie asked. She had bags under her eyes, and she looked extremely tired. Had she lost weight just since coming to Key West? "Is Tim dead?" Eva's stomach clenched. She knew Mr. Banks' first name.
Ma'am, my name is Detective Jerome Makos. We found a dead body in the pool and I need to ask you some questions.
Rosalie started to shake her head back and forth while Matt held her hand.
It's okay, Rosie, he said in a calm, even tone. Do we really need to do this tonight? My client hasn't been feeling well. I promise to make this short, but I do need to question everyone who was here. Mrs. Weston, right?
She nodded, and Jerome noted that in his notebook.
Where were you between 4 this afternoon and now?
She blinked several times as if his question was hard to understand. Then finally she said, I was in my room, I think.
You think?
She nodded slowly. I was asleep a lot today. I didn't know what time it was most of the day.
All right. Jerome noted that down.
And you, Mr. He's really dead? Rosalie said, a look of fear and concern mingled on her ashen features.
I'm afraid so. And where were you, sir? I didn't get your name.
Matt introduced himself, and Jerome wrote that down as well. Then Matt said,
I was up in my room until about 5:30, I think it was. I came over to Mrs. Weston's room to see if she wanted to go out and get a bite to eat.
And did you?
She...
He looked uncomfortable.
She didn't answer. I ordered in.
So neither of them had a true alibi.
All right.
Jerome sent a look toward Eva, and she took it as her cue to ask what she'd been most curious about since the day before. Mrs. Weston? Rosalie, she said in her kindest tone. Did you know the deceased? Rosalie flinched at the word. He's from the past. That's all. It was a shock to see him. Rosalie's voice seemed to solidify as if she were gaining strength, either due to the topic or the tea or something else, and she made a move to meet Ava's gaze. It's not something I'm proud of. It was just a shock to see him. It's been a strange week.
Explain that, Jerome said, and Eva wanted to kiss his cheek.
She couldn't have anticipated his curiosity to match hers, but it was exactly what she was wondering. What was going on with Rosalie Weston? There's not much to explain. Not really, she said, her voice trailing off as Matt clutched one of her hands in his. It's just been a week of the past coming back to haunt me, so to speak, she added quickly, looking up at Jerome. Eva thought she caught a hint of fear behind the woman's eyes, but then she looked down.
And Mr. Banks was part of that? Jerome asked.
Look, Detective, Matt said, taking over for Rosalie, who seemed to stall at his question.
I think Mrs. Weston really needs some rest. Some odd things have been happening, and Tim Banks showing up here is one of them. It's unsettled her, and I don't know that I really want her saying much more unless an attorney is present. But Mr. Jeffers, Jerome said, his eyes narrowing the way they did when he caught the hint of a thread he wanted to pull on. She's not under arrest, and I'm in no way violating her rights. Still, Matt said, standing, I think it's time for her to go to bed. Eva wasn't sure how Jerome would act to something so close to an ultimatum, but rather than push, he inclined his head and stood. I'll be in touch if I have follow-up questions. It was a bit of a challenge, Eva could see that, but Matt chose not to engage and instead turned to help Rosalie upstairs. Where'd you get the food from? Jerome asked to Matt's back. He paused, then half-turned to say, Some Chinese place? After sending one concerned look toward Mary, Matt helped Rosalie into the elevator. Jerome stood, turning to Eva. Next up, he said with a kind smile. She knew he was thinking more behind the smile, but now wasn't the time to discuss those thoughts. Just as they neared Mary, his phone rang. Sorry, I'll be right there. Eva nodded and paused to fill a mug of tea before she joined Mary at the seating area she'd chosen. It was far away from everyone else, but close to Poirot, who seemed to be observing her through the bars of his cage. Well, Miss Stewart, Mary said when Eva sat, you seem to work closely with the local police. She said it pointedly and made a show of looking between Eva and Jerome. What is that all about? Eva sat, took a sip of her tea, and considered the woman across from her before answering. You can say I'm somewhat of an amateur detective. I do work with Detective Makos from time to time. Really? Now Mary turned on the charm. I might be writing a memoir for the wrong woman. Please tell me more about this partnership.
Eva saw the woman's interest as especially odd in that moment. Didn't she care that a man had died, or that she was about to be questioned by the police? But instead she was asking Eva about her involvement with Jerome. When he came back, he asked the normal questions. Where had she been? Did she know the deceased? Had she heard anything? Mary answered everything casually, as if she didn't have a care in the world. She'd eaten out at a fancy restaurant at least half an hour away from the bed and breakfast, so there was no way she could have heard anything, and no, she didn't recognize the deceased. Eva caught her assessing gaze between them, though, and it unsettled her. Nowhere had she read that Mary Grant was cold-hearted, only that she was very good at what she did and liked to keep to herself. But this version of Mary worried Eva. It made her question the love she had for the woman's books. "Well, I think that's it for now, Miss Grant. Thank you for your time." "Of course," Mary said, standing. She paused before leaving to look back at Eva. "If you're interested in a memoir, I'm sure I could arrange something." Then she turned and headed for the elevator. "What was that all about?" Jerome asked. "I have no idea," Eva said. But she was beginning to think that the people under her roof may have more to hide than they'd first let on. "I'll be back in the morning. Perhaps we can discuss the case then." She blinked, coming out of her thoughts about Mary and her other guests, to look up at the handsome detective. "You're coming back?" "Well, there was a dead body found in your pool. While it does look like an accident, or perhaps I should say it doesn't look like foul play, I think it's best we talk about what could have happened." She wanted to ask if that was because it had happened at her bed and breakfast, or because he wanted to see her, but instead she merely nodded and watched him go. "Sarah," Eva said the next morning, walking up to the young woman with 2 cups of steaming coffee in her hands. "Can we chat for a moment?" Sarah looked up from where she was working on bookings for the new year and nodded. "Yeah, of course." Eva handed her the extra cup of coffee and headed toward the porch. They took a seat in the chairs and pulled out the blankets that Eva always put out in the chilly mornings when they had guests staying in the winter. "I love the lights," Sarah added, nodding above them. "They add a nice touch." "I agree," Eva said, considering what she was going to say next. Before Eva could decide, the young woman spoke first. "I heard about last night. I'm sorry, Eva." "Sorry?" "Well, the press was not kind this morning." Eva had pulled down the shades on the front porch for that very reason, knowing that there were many photographers camped out in front of the bed and breakfast. She had seen a few of the headlines and turned her phone off for the rest of the day. There was no one who couldn't call the Keys if they really needed to get a hold of her. "Thank you. It was traumatic, seeing a guest in the pool like that. They still don't know what happened." She thought back to when she and Bas had turned Tim over in the water. He hadn't shown any signs of foul play, aside from being deceased, of course, but she hadn't known what to look for unless it was obvious. It had taken Eva everything in her not to call Vicky that morning to ask for an update. Instead, she'd pacified herself with the fact that Jerome was coming over that morning, and she'd hopefully have answers then. But now, she was sitting here with Sarah, and she had to get her mind back on what this conversation was supposed to be about. "Sarah," Eva began, "I want you to know first that I am so pleased you're getting along well here." "Uh-oh," Sarah said, pausing to take a sip of her coffee. "This doesn't sound good." Eva offered her a smile. "Well, it's not bad, if that's what you mean." "It sounds serious. Have I done something wrong?" "No," Eva said, making sure she held the young woman's gaze. "But I do have somewhat of a concern." "Go on," Sarah said, her earnest expression bolstering Eva. "I know you and Anton have been getting along well." Sarah flushed, furthering Ava's point, but she didn't comment on that. "And I am so glad for that, I really am. But I just want you to be careful." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Isn't he a good guy? I mean, everything I've learned about him seems great." "Yes, absolutely, he is a wonderful guy," Eva said emphatically. "So then what?" Sarah trailed off. Eva rushed to explain so she wouldn't get the wrong idea. "It's not that I don't want you two seeing one another." Eva held up a hand to stay Sarah's argument that they weren't truly dating. "I just mean I have no problem with that. What I do want to do is look out for you both. I know it's really none of my business, so please don't hear me saying something I'm not, but I was under the impression that you were only here for a short time." Eva held her gaze, daring her to deny it, but she didn't. I don't want Anton or you getting hurt because you plan on leaving next year. Silence filled the air. It would be up to Sarah how she wished to handle this. Eva wouldn't have said anything, but she had a feeling that she needed to. I see, Sarah said, looking down into the dark liquid in her cup. I appreciate you saying something, Eva, I really do, she reiterated when she met Ava's gaze. I guess it's not something I really thought about. Don't get me wrong, I'm not clueless, but I guess I've gotten used to living a certain way. Kinda all in, you know? And Anton is such a great guy that I didn't even pause to think if I should spend all this time with him. I don't want to warn you off him, I really don't, Eva said, reaching out and taking Sarah's hand. But as I'm sure you've come to know, he's a sensitive one for being such a big guy. Both women laughed. He is, Sarah admitted. And I don't think I want to stop seeing him. That fact means something. Of course, I don't know exactly what that means, but I can promise you I won't let this go or move forward without thought. And that's all I ask, Sarah. The women embraced. It was an awkward hug around coffee cups and across chairs, but there was a camaraderie that had been established talking about someone they both clearly cared about. Eva felt good that she'd followed her gut instincts to speak up. Sarah pushed up from the chair, indicating her coffee was running low, and Eva dismissed her to get back to work, but she remained seated outside to take advantage of the quiet early morning. When she heard steps on the walkway, she prepared herself to tell off a reporter, but it was only Jerome. "You're outside?" he asked, taking in her cozy seat and chilling coffee. "I am." "So are they," he said, jamming his thumb behind him at what she assumed was the press. "You didn't say anything, did you?" she asked. He feigned insult. "Never. Then go grab yourself some coffee. Can I warm you up?" For the briefest of moments, her imagination got the best of her, and a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She would have said yes without hesitation, and that was telling, but she refocused on the man in front of her and offered up her mug that was shaped like a Christmas bulb. "Yes, please." He disappeared inside, and she took a moment to clear her thoughts. In the midst of the craziness of the case, that wasn't a case, but now was again, she'd almost forgotten about their odd dates that weren't dates. It was a strange season, she reasoned. Perhaps in the new year things would be clearer, but did she want to wait that long? For as long as she could remember, Eva had gotten on just fine with her bed and breakfast, her friends, and her hobbies. Photography, decorating the keys, the murder mystery book club. Everything had been in a neat box until Jerome came along and shuffled it all up. Now he was a part of each aspect of her life, but in a capacity she didn't fully understand, and she wanted closure. Or perhaps she wanted clarity? Before everything with Rosalie had turned strange, she had considered asking Jerome what they were doing, going on dates that weren't dates, working on cases that she technically shouldn't be, and even dancing around the fact that they both considered the other to be a worthy opponent not only for case-solving, but dinner company. And yet now that things had escalated with finding Tim's body, she couldn't bring herself to broach the subject. It was inconsequential in the face of murder. Still, that didn't mean that her questions had gone away. "That's a deeply pensive look," Jerome said, returning with their mugs filled with steaming coffee. "What are you contemplating out here in the chill of the morning?" The truth flitted across her mind, but she settled on the easy answer. "Everything and nothing. What have you learned about Mr. Banks?" He seemed to take her answer in stride. "Not much and a lot." "Jerome," she said, making a face. He made one back. "Sorry, I couldn't resist." "We found that he'd taken a rather large dose of sleeping pills, and considering the fact he was dressed in his swim trunks, we think his drowning was an accident. People do strange things while on vacation." "Like taking too many sleeping pills and getting in the pool?" She wasn't buying it. "I know. I don't really believe it either, but Vicky is fairly certain the man meant to take what he did. There was alcohol mixed in, and she said it looks like an accidental suicide." Eva thought back to the reality that she'd been planning to talk with him that night. She quickly shared the details with Jerome so he would know where she was coming from, and then said, "I'm not sure, but I wonder if his mental state was somehow hindered by the thought of that conversation?" She didn't want to blame herself. It wasn't as if she was exactly forcing him to talk to her, but he'd agreed,
hadn't he? Possibly, Jerome said, taking a sip. But that would be more about Rosalie than you, I'd assume. Something is up with that, and I can't figure it out. I'm hoping to get to speak with her again, but I doubt that manager of hers will let me near her. That's not going to stop you, is it? She said with a laugh. Did you see the news this morning? Eva frowned. I mean, I saw that they were reporting about the dead body, but no, this is worse. He pulled out his phone and pulled up a local news site. It turns out that Rosalie Weston was thrust into the limelight last night, and not in a flattering way. Again? It doesn't seem to end, he said. Eva took a look at the image he showed her. It was of Rosalie, her complexion chalky and her appearance disheveled, as she looked out the attic room window down toward the street. Someone, a reporter likely, had used a telephoto lens to capture the true nature of how she was doing. Of course, everyone had made comments about it. Wait, did you see this? She said, pointing to an article that had just popped up on the main page. Jerome pulled his phone back and began to read out loud. Former teen star Rosalie Weston may be on the outs. Her latest contract is facing cancellation after bad press and a suspicious murder at the bed and breakfast she's staying at for the holidays in Key West. Oh, goodness, Eva said, shaking her head. Jerome went on to read the rest, mostly conjecture about what had happened and about who the victim was, though his name had not yet been released. It all sounded circumspect and mostly filled with conjecture. I know, they're just looking to make a story no matter what. Jerome closed his phone and slid it into his pocket. I'm going to try and see if I can get Rosalie to talk with me. Do you want to come? She did, but there was something else bothering her. There had been details in the articles that Jerome had shown her that no one could have known unless they had come from inside the bed and breakfast. She'd been down this road before, once finding out that two of her guests were actually journalists, posing as a married couple to gain information on a case she and Jerome had been working, but that wasn't the case this time. At least, she was fairly certain it wasn't. So either Rosalie's agent had said something, or Mary? No, I'm going to do some digging, Eva finally said, seeing that Jerome was waiting for her response. I'll let you know what I find. He grinned. Sounds like a plan. And don't think that this investigation and the holiday season will get you out of those courses you're going to sign up for in the new year. She stood and tossed the blanket on the back of the chair. Why, detective, she said with a grin. I wouldn't dream of trying to get out of that. Chapter 10. Eva sat at the computer in the main room. It was early enough that none of her guests had come down yet, aside from Matt, who had gotten breakfast for himself and Rosalie. Then he disappeared upstairs again. While Jerome was upstairs talking with Rosalie, Eva began her search. If either Matt or Mary was behind what was happening to Rosalie, which looked closer to her being hung out to dry in the media, she wanted to find out why. Since Matt was Rosalie's agent, he would no doubt prosper if she did, so why would he share negative things about her with the press? Could Mary possibly be the leak? It seemed odd, too. Both women seemed to have a normal working relationship as they worked on the memoir together. Was there something more that Eva was missing? She started by searching for Mary Grant on Google. As she'd expected, there weren't many photos of her. The ones that she could find were either blurry or so far away it could have been a random person dressed up to look like Mary. Then again, how did people know what Mary looked like if they never saw her? Still, the woman in the photos did look somewhat like Mary. The hair was the same, the clothing style seemed consistent with what Eva had seen, and the general height and body type all seemed to fit. But nothing was distinctive. And Eva had started to wonder, was Mary truly Mary? It made no sense that she wouldn't be. There was nothing she'd gained from pretending to be the memoir writer, unless an audience with Rosalie Weston was the goal. She'd known people to do strange things to meet celebrities, but this, it seemed a bit far-fetched. Morning, Eva, Jake said, coming in from the back door. Oh, Jake, Eva said, jerking back from the computer. You scared me. Sorry, I climbed the back fence. I know you said to just be careful when I came, but I don't need more publicity in my life. Eva laughed at this. He was a college kid, and from what she knew, hadn't even had any publicity unless he'd been caught on camera during the last scandal of the bed and breakfast, but she doubted it. I think you just wanted to climb the fence to know that you could, she mused. His guilty look said it all. What are you working on?
You looked really into it. You could say that. She explained that she was looking for confirmation of Mary Grant's identity, and he raised his eyebrows. Where have you looked so far? She recounted how her search had gone up until that point, then he wiggled his fingers at her. Mind if I try? Of course not. She stood, and they swapped seats, her looking over his shoulder. He typed in a few commands, and suddenly a page full of celebrities flashed before her. Okay, so I will not go full out on this, but I've heard how people find pictures that no one can find of certain celebs. I think if you're looking for her, she'll be on there. He typed in Mary's name and occupation, and they waited. The images were slow to load, but they were somewhat better. Still grainy, as if taken from a far distance. But then a link caught Ava's gaze. What's that? He clicked on it, and an obscure blog post from several years ago appeared. Looks like they were able to sit next to her at a restaurant, and... Jake skimmed the words that were too small for Ava to read from her distance. It says here they didn't want to ruin her privacy. Likely they didn't want to get sued. What's that, then? Ava said, pointing to a small photo along the line of text. They took a photo of her arm? I think it's a birthmark. He tried to enlarge it, but the image just pixelated and made it impossible to see. That's as good as it gets, I guess. Ava studied the image and committed the placement to mind. If this person really had been eating lunch next to Mary Grant and had truly considered her privacy, then this birthmark on the back of her right forearm might be the only way to identify the woman herself. So how certain are you that this photo is legitimate? Jake made a face. You mean the website? Yes. I mean, I know it looks odd, not like most websites I've seen, but is that typical of something like this? Jake leaned back, running a hand through his hair before he answered. I'd say it's kind of typical of blogs like this. Sure, it's a few years old, but the people who have links on the site we were on before... He waited for her to nod that she understood. Well, they tend to be the kind of people who might believe in conspiracy theories, but they won't be making things up. You'd give this site a high accuracy value, then? He shrugged again. Yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't exactly bet on this person and their sighting, but there's nothing that I read or in the code that I see on their site that suggests they're misleading anyone. Actually? Jake leaned forward now, elbows on the desk. The fact that they purposefully didn't post her picture adds some credibility in my mind. Ava nodded. I was thinking the same thing. There was no one holding them to that. They just decided to do it themselves. Exactly. All right. Ava stood. Would you mind scouring these pages for a little while longer? I need to make a few calls, but I want to make sure we aren't missing anything that might give us insight into Mary Grant's life. Jake narrowed his eyes. It's kind of odd for you to be looking into a guest, isn't it? She smiled. I know, it isn't typical of me. If she was just a guest, and we hadn't found a dead body in the pool, things would be different. Ava wrapped her arms around herself at that thought and sighed. These are extenuating circumstances. Jake nodded. I figured it was something like that. Yes, plus... She leveled her gaze at him. I don't plan to use this information in any way other than to verify she is who she says she is. You think she's not? Ava paused before answering his question. Did she? She couldn't put her finger on it. There was no indication that Mary Grant was being dishonest, but Ava's gut was telling her to look into things further. Let's put it this way, Ava said, moving around to the front of the desk. I don't think she's lying to us, but I also don't get the feeling she's telling the whole truth either. He nodded. Got it, boss. Thanks, Jake. You know I don't need an excuse to dig into people's backgrounds. He made a face. Not that I do that often. You better not, she said with a laugh. But his wording gave her an idea. And actually, will you look into how she made the reservation? And Mrs. Weston as well. I just can't shake the feeling something is off. Sure thing. Ava nodded, more to herself, and left Jake to his computer work. She spent the rest of her time with Poirot, working on teaching him to say Merry Christmas, which was slow going, but he'd gotten the Merry down since the last time she'd worked with him. When Jerome appeared downstairs again, she went to him, hoping to hear what he'd learned, but he shook his head. Not much to report, I'm afraid. That agent of Mrs. Weston's is more like a lawyer. He's got her locked down so tightly she hardly talked. Isn't that suspicious? Yes, but she did finally admit she'd gone to high school with Tim Banks. High school? It seemed like such a far-off possibility that Eva hadn't even considered it. How does that play into her seeing him here? He was, supposedly, the winner of a trip here. She made a mental note to have Jake look into that as well. I don't know. Again, I didn't get a very clear picture, but it seems as if something traumatic happened back then, and she can't bring herself to talk about it. It's odd having them meet here, but I don't see that it has any bearing on his death. Unless... Jerome rubbed at his jaw for a moment. Unless that event in high school is what set him off. I suppose we can only know when we know what that was. Do you think she'll talk later if she's in a better frame of mind? Perhaps. He pulled out his phone and shook his head. I've got to run. I'll talk to you later. Are you coming to the party on Wednesday? Wouldn't miss it, he said with a grin. The fact that he was coming eased some of her worry over everything else that was going on. If nothing else, she and the rest of the Murder Mystery Book Club would enjoy a fun night of holiday festivities. Hopefully, Mary would join them as well. Perhaps they'd even get a chance to see her birthmark, Eva thought with a laugh. Jerome left, and Eva went back to the rest of the decorating she'd set out to do the day before but hadn't finished. Then she sent out a text to the MMBC. It was at times like these that she needed her friend's expertise and ideas more than she realized. After getting several replies, Eva rushed back to her cottage. In less than 10 minutes, she'd put on a hat, scarf, and sunglasses. There was no way the news crews would hound her today. She'd dodge them at every turn if that meant staying out of the limelight for now. Maxine, you are a lifesaver, Eva said, accepting the kiss on both cheeks from the woman. You know you always have a place here, to meet, to eat, or whatever else you need. I owe you a staycation at the bed and breakfast. The woman and owner of By Lamplight, one of the MMBC's favorite restaurants, grinned back at her. That sounds lovely. I might just take you up on that. Eva grinned. Please do. Maxine led her through the dining room to a private room in the back where some of the MMBC had already gathered. As they walked, she assured Eva that only her favorite waitress would have access to the room, and she was the epitome of discretion. Eva didn't doubt that one bit and quickly settled into a chair around a circular table. Willard, Geraldine, Elijah, and Pete were all there and looked eager to help her. Kay is so sad she can't make it, Pete said. She had a hair appointment today that she couldn't miss. I trust you can pass along all the information to her so she won't miss out. Exactly what I told her, thank you. She's just got FOMO. She's got what? Willard said, reaching for a hunk of bread and a pat of butter from the center of the table. Fear of missing out, Elijah said, also reaching for the bread. I've got that too. It's why I'm here when I should be painting. They all laughed, but Eva sobered quickly. I'm sorry to take you all away from things you're doing. I'll try and make it quick. We all have to eat, right? Willard shrugged. Apparently, some of us more than others, Geraldine said, with a side-eye cast at her friend. Willard made a face, but kept eating his hunk of brown bread. So your message had me super curious, Pete said. What is it you need us to do? Eva paused for the waitress to serve bowls of food and plates for them all to share. Eva had insisted that Maxine do the ordering for them since she always prepared a beautiful family-style spread. Besides, she felt a little guilty for imposing on short notice. She quickly filled her plate, then started to fill everyone in on the situation. I know this is going to come as a surprise, and I'm not going to say that it's fact. She made sure to look around the table. But I think there's something odd going on with Mary and Rosalie. Does this have anything to do with the guy who died last night? Elijah asked around a bite of mashed potatoes. Yes and no. I mean, it's clear to me that Rosalie, Mrs. Weston, is keeping something from the police. I mean, she had a visceral reaction to seeing Mr. Banks, the deceased, but neither of them talked about why that was the case. Today, Jerome was able to gather that they went to high school together. Apparently, something happened back then, but there was nothing else mentioned. You need someone to look into that high school incident for sure, Elijah said. I'll do it. That would be great, Eva said, nodding along and taking a bite of her pasta. I think we also need someone to look into Mary Grant. All eyes turned to her. Really? Why? Pete asked. There was something off about the way she reacted last night, and before you say anything, I do know that people react differently to dead bodies, so I don't want to base these feelings solely on that. But she also implied she'd like to write my story, and that makes sense.
Geraldine said, pointing her fork at Eva. "You've got a great story." "Perhaps, but to try and flatter me last night, it was wrong." "Gut reactions are nothing to go on," Willard pointed out. And he had a good point. One Eva had considered as well, but she couldn't let this go. "I don't want to discredit her or even out her to anyone, but I do think I want to be sure we're actually dealing with Mary Grant." "You think she's an imposter?" Geraldine gasped. This time she held Eva's gaze. "I don't know. It would be easy, wouldn't it? But we know she's got a solid alibi for the night of Mr. Banks' death, though we don't even know if it was conclusively accidental. Surely Mrs. Weston would have someone backing up the woman's story, like an agent or something." "Maybe. I mean, her agent is staying at the Keys, so someone can look into him as well." "I'll take him," Pete said. "Thanks, Pete." Eva was happy that things were falling into place, and her friends seemed to understand the need to do this quickly, despite the fact that it was nearing the holidays. "Who else is there?" Geraldine asked. "I do want to be sure about Mary. Jake found a website that suggested she had a birthmark on her arm. I'm trying to think of something we could do at the Christmas party to have everyone roll up their sleeves. Of course, that's assuming she actually comes to the party." "You think she'll skip?" Willard asked. "Possibly. I don't know. She doesn't seem to be social, but that's in line with who she is in the media, a recluse." "I'll chat with Vicky and maybe we can come up with something," Elijah said. "How about Geraldine and I look into her background?" Willard offered. "I may still have some connections in the media from my younger days." "You don't have younger days," Geraldine said with a silly face. He ignored her, but went on to say, "Maybe we can come up with a fuller picture of who she is, maybe even through her publisher." "That's a good point," Eva said. "Wouldn't they know what she was working on next?" "In some cases, yes," Willard said. "And in other cases, no. It just depends if she's working on spec or if they hire her for specific books." "Sounds like you know what you're talking about," Eva said with a smile as she considered her next move. She hadn't assigned Mr. Aubert to anyone since he was technically missing, so she tasked herself with attempting to locate him if possible. They focused on their meal for a little while longer, then Eva checked the time. "I've got to get back. Anton is working on some last-minute menu items for our party Wednesday. How about stopping by if you find out anything? If not, we'll just focus on the party and work on this after Wednesday night." They all agreed and stood to go, but Geraldine pulled Eva to a stop. "You don't think that anything will happen to you, do you?" "Me? Why?" "Well, it seems like crazy things are happening at your bed and breakfast, and you're in the middle of it all." "I'm sure I don't have anything to worry about," Eva assured her, hoping that was true. "Just be careful," Geraldine said, squeezing her arm gently. "You can never be too cautious." "I will be, I promise." The women shared a smile. "Call me if you need anything." Eva nodded. "You and Willard get to work on what you can, and I'll keep you posted about how things go on my end. There has to be some sort of tradition that will cause Mary Grant to roll up her sleeves." Geraldine laughed. "Well, if there is, you'll be the one to think of it." Eva paid the bill and said her goodbyes to Maxine, who wished her a Merry Christmas. Then Eva was in a cab back to the house. She had a party to finish planning, a bed and breakfast to run, and a potential crime to solve. The only problem was, what was the crime? Chapter 11. Eva found that the next few days went by quickly. Her preparations for the MMBC Christmas party consumed her when she wasn't trying to gain a word with Rosalie or Matt Jeffers, be on the lookout for Mr. Aubert, and covertly watch Mary. All of it seemed to be for naught, though. Mary Grant stayed in her room or the attic, going so far as to ask for her breakfast to be brought up to the attic, and Rosalie Weston never left her room. Matt was nearly as attentive as a husband, spending his time bringing her things, but Ava's pleas to take Mrs. Weston to a doctor went unanswered. Matt insisted she just needed rest and especially didn't need the media hearing of a visit to a doctor. A part of Eva understood. The newspapers hadn't been kind. Eva wondered if that had something to do with her secretive status. They were saying that there were skeletons in Rosalie's closet, and reporters were searching for people close to her who were willing to talk. Eva found it to be odd, knowing that they would say something like that without having something to publish. Then again, she supposed they could say whatever they wanted as long as they didn't print slanderous things.
Now, Wednesday afternoon, Eva was in full-on party mode with no time to consider her odd house guests. Anton was cooking up a storm in the kitchen, and Eva had formally invited each guest to the party that night via an invitation card slipped under their doors. Unfortunately, she wasn't sure anyone would show. She hoped that Mary's prior agreement would stand, though. Her invite had only been a kind gesture, but Eva had made sure she worded the card to say the woman was expected. While Eva had done her best to think of an activity or something that would offer Mary a reason to roll up her sleeves, she'd had no success coming up with an idea. After all, it was a party. Sleeves were either up or down, but it never mattered either way. The only thing she'd thought of was raising the temperature, but then she wondered if it was wise to make all of her guests uncomfortable for the sake of satisfying her own curiosity. If that was really what she was doing. Sighing, Eva rushed toward the kitchen with a packet of edible gold leaf she'd found in her own pantry. "This should work, right, Anton?" He took the packet and looked it over. "Perfection. Anton is sorry about this," he said, shaking his head. "The gold balls just melted off. Anton thought they'd be perfect." She shook her head, resting her hand on his arm. "You have nothing to be sorry for. The whole spread will be amazing. I just know it." "Thanks, Miss S," he said, slipping past her to reach for a canister of flour. "I'll get out of your way." He merely winked in her direction, and she stepped out of the kitchen, nearly knocking into Sarah. "Sorry," Sarah said, holding up a grocery bag. "He sent you on errands too?" Sarah blushed. "Not exactly. I thought he might be so focused on his work that he wouldn't make time to eat. I brought him some Chinese food. He says it's his favorite." Eva smiled back at the young woman, happy to see how she was caring for Anton. "That is so kind of you, Sarah." "No problem. Do you have everything you need set up for the party? The table looks amazing." Sarah gestured to the long tables that Eva had pulled together with Jake's help. She decorated them with gold and red Christmas decorations, one of her favorite color combinations. The white linen tablecloths and napkins set off the colors perfectly. "I think I've got it all covered for now. I just need you here and ready by 6 tonight." "You've got it." Sarah had agreed to help Eva with the serving, but she would also get to take part since she was a member of the MMBC. After all, Eva didn't want to always make her work, even if it was part of her job. "Do you need anything else for tonight, Senora?" Benita said, coming out of the downstairs hallway. She wore a festive Christmas sweater, and Eva smiled as she admired it. "I think we're good to go. Are you sure you can't make it?" "I'm sorry. My family is gathering tonight, or else I would." "And where you go, Boss and Elena go too," Eva said with a sigh. She wished her house manager, maid, and gardener could come to the party tonight. The MMBC had already okayed it and was looking forward to having them, but Benita had sprung the news to her on Monday. "See, they are close with my family." "Well, I hope you all have a wonderful party. Fiesta." Benita smiled. "Gracias." Eva nodded and watched the woman make her way toward the cleaning closet. She'd taken over Elena's shift for that day so the girl could attend another party in the area. Eva felt a pang of happiness in her chest at the reality that she had such devoted staff. They were always there when she needed them, no matter if they encountered a dead body or not. It was an odd thing to be thankful for, she knew, but they were her staff and she was thankful. She looked back at the table and counted one more time. Yes, she had enough seats. Jake had said he'd be able to make it, and she'd encouraged him to bring a +1, which, surprisingly, he'd agreed to. He wasn't one to flaunt his dates, but she was looking forward to meeting whoever had caught his eye. Then there was the whole of the Murder Mystery Book Club members, her current guests, and Anton, who had agreed to join them once the food was finished. There were other people Eva would have loved to invite, like Maxine from By Lamplight or Ruben, though she hadn't heard from him in over 2 weeks. In the end, she decided to keep the gathering smaller. Perhaps smaller wasn't the proper word. There would possibly be up to 13 people there that night. Eva quickly went over the table one last time, making slight adjustments to the place settings before she was satisfied. Then she headed back to her cottage. She spent the rest of the afternoon relaxing, as they had closed the front door to the keys, locked it even, unless you were leaving, and she enjoyed a bubble bath, a second hot cup of coffee, and a good book. At 4:30, she began to get ready. It wasn't that it took her too long, not with her shorter red hair that would contrast to her emerald green gown for the night. Her makeup didn't take long either, but she did want to be over at the main building early enough to help Anton with anything that might have been missed and to mix up some drinks for those in attendance. The sound of Billie Holiday singing "I've Got My Love to Keep Me Warm" embraced Eva as she stepped onto the main floor of the bed and breakfast. The sun had already started its descent, and the myriad of white Christmas lights she'd hung up sparkled and twinkled in the growing darkness. The table practically glittered with the addition of small fairy lights Sarah must have added, and Eva fawned over the warm glow before she made her way toward the kitchen. Anton's voice rang out from the kitchen, and Eva smiled to hear the man singing. "What do I care how much it may storm? I've got my love to keep me warm," he blared out. Eva giggled and stepped in to see him dancing around with a wooden spoon held up like a microphone. Sarah was opposite him on the other side of the stainless steel prep table, singing right along as well. It didn't look like a personal moment, so Eva burst in with, "I thought you ought to know my heart's on fire." "The flame, it just leaps higher," Anton returned, grinning back with her. "So I will weather the storm," Sarah said, twirling around as the song continued. Then each of them stopped to sing, "I've got my love to keep me warm." They burst into laughter, and Anton moved toward the stereo to turn the music down so they could talk without shouting. "Now that was classy," he said, turning to stir something that smelled delicious on the stove. "I just came in to see if you needed anything. Looks like you've got it under control, as well as a bit of karaoke going on, too." "Anton loves Christmas songs," he said, flashing her a serious smile. "That you do. Well, I'm going to work on that punch I told you about in the drinks table as well. If you think of anything, call for me." "You got it." "Need any help?" Sarah said, following Eva toward the refrigerator where she'd placed most of the items she needed for a delicious, fizzing party punch. "I don't think so. Why don't you keep helping Anton, if he needs it? He's like a one-man cooking show," Sarah said with a laugh. Eva knew that was the case from having worked so long with him, and she was glad to see that Sarah was starting to see the other sides of him as well. Carrying all of the punch ingredients to the front room, Eva headed to the drink table she'd set up toward the back of the room. Guests would have plenty of choices. She'd have the non-alcoholic punch, a few cocktails should people want them, as well as water with lime and raspberries floating in it to give off that perfect Christmas color scheme. Keeping an eye on the time, Eva made sure every small detail was ready to go at just the right time, and as 6:30 rolled around, her first guest arrived. Geraldine walked in wearing a sparkling gold gown that draped all the way to the floor, the hint of her red shoes poking out as she walked. She had a modern fascinator pinned to her gray hair, and it sparkled with jewels. "Well, don't you look fantastic?" Eva said, walking up to her and kissing her on both cheeks. "I think you're the spirit of Christmas itself." Geraldine gave a girlish giggle and lightly touched her hair. "You think so?" "Positively stunning," Eva said as she looked behind the woman. "Don't you think, Willard?" He grinned as he took in his friend. "You do look lovely. Bonnie would be envious of that dress." "Where is Bonnie?" Eva asked. She'd had the woman down as a maybe to attend, but it looked as if Willard was by himself. "She came down with a cold yesterday. Poor thing. I've been tending to her all day, but she just couldn't muster up the energy to come. Plus, she didn't want to infect y'all." He shrugged. "But yes, I'm here with express instructions about my diet." He said the word like it tasted bad, and both women laughed. "When are you not?" Eva said. "True," he admitted. "But she did say I could have 2 desserts tonight. I took an extra long walk today," he added. "Good for you. Why don't you and Geraldine get your drinks? I think I see a few more arriving." They bypassed Eva and she opened the door to Kay and Pete. Pete wore a dark navy suit coat and slacks. His button-up shirt was a bright red color that matched Kay's dress. Her gold bracelet caught the light as she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Eva noticed that the chain was made up of little dog and cat paws connected by gems. "Welcome and Merry Christmas," Eva said, greeting them and taking Kay's wrap and purse to place in the storage closet behind the desk. "Make yourself at home and feel free to grab some punch or other drinks." They joined Geraldine and Willard at the drinks table just as Elijah, Vicky, and Jerome arrived. Vicky wore a stunning deep purple dress that hugged her shapely curves until it flared out at the knees in a lovely mermaid style. Elijah wore a suit coat and a silly paint-splattered bow tie with skinny slacks. Jerome was dressed in a dark suit. Eva took an extra moment to admire him as Vicky and Elijah joined the other members. "You look
She struggled to find the right word, then decided to be honest and bold. "Very handsome. And you look stunning," he said, taking in the green velvet dress that hugged her body like a glove. Not too tight, but just enough with added pleats for movement. She felt decidedly feminine in it. Her 4-inch gold heels helped with the height difference between her and Jerome, so they were nearly eye to eye. When she met his gaze, something warm streaked through her at the intensity of his look, but then his hand wrapped around hers, and he bent down to kiss her knuckles. It almost would have been comical, a scene from an old movie, perhaps, but it fit the festive moment perfectly. Eva started to speak, but then the door opened and she saw Jake coming in with a petite young woman hanging on his arm. "Hello, Jake," she said, dipping her head at Jerome, who merely nodded and wandered off to join the rest of the crew. "Hey, Eva," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "This is Maya, my date." He was so happy he nearly giggled. One look at the young woman told Eva all she needed to know. Maya was just as happy to be here with Jake. "Welcome, Maya. I hope you two enjoy the party. We have some amazing food prepared by my chef and a few fun games that I think we'll all enjoy." "Thank you so much for letting me come," Maya said. She looked just as sweet as she sounded, and the two made their way toward the drink table together. Thankfully, Jake knew most of the murder mystery book club and would be able to introduce Maya. Sarah walked up just then to give Eva an updated timeline for the food, but she paused before going back to the kitchen. "Jerome sure does look handsome tonight, doesn't he?" She gave Eva a conspiratorial smile. Eva couldn't help the blush that crept up her neck. Yes, she noticed, but she also wasn't sure how she was feeling about him. She still hadn't had a chance to talk with him about asking her out without actually asking her out, and... The door opened, and Ruben stood there wearing a charcoal gray suit and a Christmas tie. "Hola, dulzura." She blinked. Hello! I didn't think you were coming. Oh no, did you not receive my RSVP? She frowned. Had she received one from him? She didn't think so, but she didn't want him to feel bad. "No problem, there'll be plenty of food. Feel free to go make yourself a drink." "I will, but..." He paused, lightly placing his hand on her bare upper arm. "You look muy hermosa." "Thank you," she said, though his comment didn't affect her nearly as much as Jerome's had. Ruben stepped past her, and Sarah turned to her. "Wait, what is going on?" Eva sighed. Ruben's appearance here was unexpected, but since Bonnie wasn't joining them, it worked out perfectly for the seating. She only hoped that he and Jerome wouldn't end up talking about anything uncomfortable. She was being silly, though. There was nothing between her and Ruben, despite how much he'd like there to be, and yet there was something between her and Jerome. What that was, she wasn't quite ready to explore, but she had a feeling the opportunity to do so would arise sooner than later. Still, Sarah's comment stuck with her. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "But we're going to have a wonderful time no matter what, right?" "Right," Sarah said, her smile holding a bit of amusement. Instead of responding, she sent Sarah off to tell Anton about the additional mouth to feed, though she didn't anticipate there being any issues. Then she joined her guests on the other side of the bed and breakfast's main floor. She walked past the row of indoor ferns and plants that created somewhat of a natural barrier from the front of the house, with a row of open windows, and the rest of the space. It felt cozy and secluded, but it also allowed her guests enough room to mingle around the table and provided small seating areas in addition to their dining places. She caught Jake and Maya talking to Poirot. Jake was showing her how to feed him almonds after he did a trick, and Eva found herself happy that they could find something to entertain themselves when it was likely the adults were talking about more grown-up things. She did have to remind herself they were college students, not teenagers, but that didn't mean they all had much in common. As she joined the group, she saw that most had broken off into smaller clusters to talk and enjoy the beverages and hors d'oeuvres Sarah had brought out from the kitchen. "This is all so beautiful," Kay said, leaving Pete to talk with Ruben about something construction-related based on what Eva could hear. "I mean, it's like a Christmas wonderland. And that dress!" She shook her head. "You look amazing. And look, we're like Christmas together." Kay reached her arm around Eva, and they both laughed. Her bright red dress matched perfectly with Eva's green one, and she caught Sarah's eye to snap a photo of them.
Eva moved to the next group and the next, thanking them for coming and letting them know it would only be a few minutes before it was time to eat. When she made her way to the opposite end of the room, she looked up to see Matt appear from the elevator. She knew his room was on the bottom floor, but he had likely been spending time with Rosalie. She excused herself and walked up to him. He looked festive in a dark green jacket and slacks with a white button-up. "You came," she said, putting on her most welcoming smile. "I did. I hope it's not inappropriate." "Of course not," she said, gesturing to the party behind her. "We're just a bunch of friends, and there'll be some amazing food tonight. I'm hoping all of my guests will come, but—" She trailed off, interested to see what he would say. "I think Rosalie would be home right now if she could be. She's not doing well." "Do we need to call in a doctor?" Eva asked. "It's not like that," he was quick to assure her. "It's more mental than anything." "Then a psychologist?" "She's been meeting with someone online." "I see." Eva sipped the punch she'd grabbed from the table and considered the man in front of her. "Why are you still here, Mr. Jeffers?" He looked confused. "At the party?" "No, with Rosalie. I assume you have family to spend the holidays with, but you're here with a client? And can't she go home?" "Not yet," he said, then looked away, frowning. "What I mean is, she's not ready to travel." He'd slipped. She didn't know why that was important, but she made a mental note of it. "Well, either way, enjoy the party. Dinner will be served soon." "Thanks," Matt said, moving past her toward the drinks table where he served himself a cocktail. Eva turned to look back at the elevator doors when she noticed a presence at her elbow. Turning, she smiled up at Jerome. "Hello again. What was that all about? Is he invited?" Eva laughed. "Yes, he's invited. I invited each of my guests, and I thought Mary would be here, but so far only Mr. Jeffers has shown up. And Ruben." The way he said it drew Eva's gaze. "Yes, I didn't think he was coming, but here he is. What's up with the two of you?" The way Jerome casually brought up the question shocked her, and Eva suddenly found her throat parched. "He's just a friend, that's all," she said, taking a sip of her punch. "Right. Does he know that?" Her mouth dropped open and she couldn't stop it. "What does that mean?" "Dinner is served," Anton said from the doorway, his booming voice drowning out everyone's conversation. "Thank goodness I'm starving," Eva heard Willard say. Everyone moved quickly to take their seats, and Eva maneuvered away from Jerome to make sure everyone knew where they were to go. Ruben in Bonnie's seat, Maya at Jake's +1 seat, and Matt at the end of the table. As they all sat, Eva put aside her conversation with Jerome, the odd things that had been happening to her guest, and the unexpected appearance of Ruben. Instead of worrying, she was determined to be truly thankful for everyone around the table. It was the perfect Christmas setting. She turned to the table and held up her glass. "Let's eat." Chapter 12. The night was dark and stormy, Jerome was saying to the table. "Of course it was," Geraldine said, rolling her eyes as everyone laughed with her. "It's how all the best ghost stories start," Jerome said, making sure he got Geraldine to smile at this. "Get on with it," Willard said. "I want dessert." "Nothing new there," Elijah muttered to more laughter. "It was dark and stormy. A night much like this, but, stormier." Jerome shrugged and everyone laughed. "And I was walking my beat in New York." "So this is a personal story," Elijah said, leaning forward. "Yep." Jerome waggled his eyebrows and continued to tell what had taken place when he was a young cop in New York. It was Christmas Eve, and he'd tried to stop a purse snatching, but he'd slipped on ice. There I was, running full out, and it was icy. So icy I slipped and completely lost my suspect. "What'd you do?" Jake asked, fully engrossed in the story. "I got up to keep chasing him, but when I rounded the corner in Central Park, I saw this guy hanging by the back of his jacket on a statue." "What?" Geraldine's exclamation made everyone laugh nervously. "I know. I didn't know what had happened, but the lady's purse was at his feet. I helped him get down and arrested him naturally, so in the car on the way to the precinct, I asked how he'd gotten up there. You know what he told me?" "What?" Maya said. "He said a Christmas ghost had put him up there." Maya and Jake gasped. Everyone else looked skeptical. "I know. I was just like you. I laughed it off. But later that night, as I was walking home to my small apartment, I caught sight of a blur that was red and white."
Jerome paused for a few dramatic seconds before he continued. I honestly think it was the Christmas ghost. Everyone laughed and shook their heads at him. Go on, laugh, but I'm telling you, I never would have caught that guy. It was probably some, how do you say, Ruben's brow furrowed, some do-gooder who caught him. Maybe? Jerome shrugged and took a sip of his drink. But the guy said he blacked out and suddenly was hanging from that statue. And what's more, I talked to a few other rookies, and they said the same thing had happened to them with guys who'd gotten away. A Christmas ghost catching bad guys, Pete said. I like it. Jerome leaned back, and that was Eva's cue to signal for dessert. Anton came in with trays of delicious goodies for them all, and the conversation centered around the treats. She'd balked at the idea of Jerome telling a ghost story, but he'd insisted that it had been a tradition at his family's home, and he had the perfect story. After hearing it, she had to admit it wasn't creepy so much as it was fascinating to think a Christmas caper was caught by none other than a kind spirit of Christmas. Or some vigilante who only went out on Christmas Eve. The night was quickly winding down as the desserts disappeared one by one, and yet Mary still hadn't joined them. Eva had hoped she'd come and they could ask her to share a little about her memoir writing process, but she hadn't so much as called down from her room. Eva was too concerned about bothering her to reach out. Instead, Eva brought out her favorite party games, and the group adjourned to couches that made up a circle. Jake and Maya, as well as Matt, bowed out early, but everyone else stayed and played a few games. By the end of the night, everyone was in good spirits, and they laughed their way to the door with small gift bags that Eva had made for them as party favors. A small ornament for their tree, some chocolates from her favorite chocolatier, and a small note for them each about the holiday. Jerome was the last to leave, and she watched him walk down the sidewalk, hoping that images of him leaving the bed and breakfast wouldn't show up in the paper the next morning. And if they did, she hoped they wouldn't contain extreme stories about why he was there. Clearly it was a party, but the media wouldn't care about that, just the fact that he was a detective. The space was quiet now, the table cleared of plates, and Anton and Sarah were washing dishes in the kitchen. Only the faint sound of laughter and more Christmas music floated out from the open doorway. Rather than start cleaning up that night, Eva had already decided to do it in the morning. It wasn't too late yet, only nearing 9 o'clock, but Eva had an idea, and she was going to go ahead with it, no matter if it was somewhat unconventional. She spent the next few minutes pulling together a small plate of assorted desserts and headed for the elevator. When she reached the second story, she paused at Mary's door, noticing that it wasn't shut all the way. She looked down the hallway, but Rosalie's door was closed and there was no sound coming underneath it as if the television was on. Was she asleep so early? Still, Eva reached up and knocked on the door. It opened several more inches, not something Eva had meant to cause, but it afforded her a view of the open closet. She couldn't help but notice there was an odd gown hung up there. It looked too old to be a current style, long and flowing and in a light blue color. The sight of it triggered something in Eva's memory, Rosalie describing the image of the ghost she thought she'd seen. Things had started to seem odd, but this, "Can I help you?" Eva jumped back from the door to see Mary approaching from the elevator. I brought you some dessert since you weren't able to make the party tonight. I thought you might be in your room and hadn't heard me knock. The woman moved to stand in front of the door, pulling it almost closed behind her. No, I was up in the attic. There was something I'd forgotten from our session today. Rosalie was up for a meeting today, she asked, surprised. The woman hadn't seemed coherent the last time she spoke with her. We only met for a little while, Mary admitted. Thank you for these. I'm sorry I couldn't make it tonight. And with that, she took the plate and disappeared into her room, closing the door behind her. It was odd, but almost more than odd. Telling. Eva slipped down the hall and into the elevator. Mary was hiding something, and Eva had a feeling it was all connected. Jacques' poisoning, Tim's death, and Rosalie's strange behavior. She just had to find out how and why. Chapter 13. Jerome showed up at her door the next day with a smile and an invitation. She almost turned down his offer for lunch, wanting to continue the research she was doing into Mary's very closeted life. But she was tired and hungry, and Jerome's charm won out. Good, he said, helping her into her coat. We'll discuss the case. She frowned, though he couldn't see her, because this was just what he liked to do. Get her to go to a meal with him, and then make it about work. It was possible that was all he was truly interested in. Maybe he missed his partner, like he'd said. But was that all these meals were? Jerome, do you want to go to lunch with me, or do you want to work? I'll do one. Her boldness surprised even her, but perhaps it was time for honesty. Well, he started, his head tilting to the side. I'd like to go to lunch. Work can wait. She felt the corners of her lips turn up. She knew they'd talk about work, but that wasn't the point. Perfect. Let's go. On the way, he kept the topics light, no doubt to keep the cabbie from listening in. Soon they arrived at a cafe on the water and were shown to a private table. So I think... Wait. He tried to look calm as he reached for his menu. I can tell you about this later. Oh, come on, she laughed. I know you want to tell me. Go ahead. I got to thinking about this Jacques guy again, he said, looking between her and the menu. I did some digging. You found something? She asked, taking a sip of her lemon water. I did. Jerome reached to pull out his phone. It turns out he was born in America, Maryland, I think, but then moved to France for college and ended up staying. His name isn't even really Aubert. It's Levin. Eva frowned. Does that mean anything? Not that I know of, but I'm looking into it. Eva decided to push ahead with news of her own. I've got the MMBC helping me with a few things. Like... He sounded wary, but not unhappy. Like Elijah looking into a high school connection and Pete checking out Rosalie's agent. Geraldine and Willard are looking into Mary's background and the publisher. Do you think it's wise to involve them? It's almost Christmas. They insisted, she said with a smile. Besides, have you ever known them to turn down an opportunity to help? Good point. Still. He looked concerned. They'll be careful. It's only fair we look into all aspects. And now that I've found out what I have about Jacques, I can dig more into where he might be connected here. There's a missing link, though, Eva said, considering all angles. Rosalie comes here to have her memoir written, a big honor, especially by Mary Grant, if it is Ms. Grant. True, Eva conceded. But then a man shows up who won a trip to my bed and breakfast, and he clearly reacts to Rosalie. Actually, they both react to each other and no one knows why. Then he shows up dead, quite mysteriously, at least in my opinion. Don't forget there's an American Frenchman who may or may not have a photo of one of your guests and was poisoned. He doesn't seem to be involved, and then you see him across the street from your bed and breakfast. But am I the connection? Eva said, coming to the only obvious conclusion. You didn't even talk to him in the hospital. Only I did. True. She nodded along with his logic. Then there's the nightgown. Not much to go on for that. You ladies wear all sorts of things. Eva agreed, but to her it was too much of a coincidence in Mary's otherwise dark closet. And what about the agent? Jerome asked. He's either involved or he isn't. Jerome grunted. Keen observation, Miss Stewart. Hey, she said, elbowing him gently in the side. I'm just being truthful. Those are the options. Oh, speaking of, any other news about Tim? No, not yet. His background story checks out. He's originally from Virginia, but he's been in Austin for many years now. Was married, got divorced, had no kids. Seems kind of... normal. Normal is fine, she said, taking a bite of the sandwich the waitress had just delivered. But also makes our job harder. Our job, huh? He grinned around a mouthful of salmon. Too soon? She considered him, the twinkling of his green eyes and the gray coloring his temples. He was handsome, and she enjoyed these lunches with him. She enjoyed all of her time with him. But she was starting to think maybe she thought of him more than he considered her. Then again, he'd accepted her offer to just lunch, even if they were talking about the case. What? Jerome said. She realized she'd been quiet for too long. Nothing. She looked down, forking a bite of salad instead of meeting his gaze. What is it, Eva? I can tell when something's on your mind. It's... Don't say nothing. He held her gaze now, and his hand reached out to rest on top of hers before she could pick up her fork again. It's not fair, she said. What isn't? That you can do that. Just make me tell you things. I won't make you if you don't want to, but I will listen. I know. She looked away, out the window, at the water beyond him. It was choppy today and windy out, but still beautiful. Eva felt questions rise in her chest like an ocean swell. She had to ask him what was going on. She knew it would risk their easy camaraderie, and she didn't want to do that, but she also didn't want to be kept in the dark. Is there more between us? Eva said, feeling her stomach clench. He took in a breath, his hand slipping from hers to pick up a napkin and dab at the corners of his mouth. Okay, so we're having this conversation now? She blushed. I didn't want to, but you insisted, and the longer we go, the more I'll wonder. Fair enough, he said, tossing his napkin down. I like you, Eva Stewart. A lot. You're intelligent, a wonderful business owner, a spectacular investigator, and I enjoy your company. I'm not sure what I want this to be. Part of me just enjoys having a smart partner to toss ideas around with. He winked. But other times, I see you for who you are, beyond the investigation. A beautiful woman whose company I enjoy. I get the two mixed up. You were right to call me out earlier. She was flattered by his words and shocked at his honesty. It was refreshing. He continued. What I want is probably both of those things. What that looks like, I have no idea. I'm happy to make more of my intentions known, depending on the circumstances, if that would make it better for you. Her brow wrinkled. It wouldn't for you too? I like where we're at, but I can see how it could be confusing. He seemed to understand, which he appreciated. What did she want? Leaning back against her seat, she considered his words. She could ask for clarity each time and run the risk that he'd get tired of that, or she could go on with the vague nature of their current friendship. But neither of those options seemed right. Instead, she said, I think it would be nice if you took me on a date sometime. Otherwise, I have no problem going on work meals with you, unspecified or not. His lopsided grin widened, and he nodded. Noted. I'll be clear in the future. She held his gaze for a moment, wondering if she'd pushed it too far, but he seemed no less interested in their conversation or their lunch. Instead, she decided to stop second-guessing herself. She'd followed her gut, despite what Willard said about it, and she was happy to see that they seemed to be on the same page. After another hour of conversation, ranging from the case, or lack thereof, to holiday plans, the two left the cafe and got into another cab. The drive back to the bed and breakfast, which Jerome insisted he accompany her on, went by quickly. 10 minutes later, they got out and made their way toward the Keys. Thankfully, most of the camera crews had moved on when they realized Rosalie Weston wasn't going anywhere, and certainly wasn't making herself available to the public. Eva had seen an interview Matt had done that morning. He'd told reporters that Rosalie was unwell, and she wouldn't be making any future appearances until she was better. Eva tilted her head to the side. It's odd Rosalie has taken such a turn for the worse. You think there's something to that? He asked, holding the gate for her. Well, She paused, looking to the side of the house. Jerome! She pulled him to her side and down to a crouch behind some bushes. What? He dropped his voice when he saw she was pointing. What is it? He looked through the leaves that she held back and blinked rapidly. Is that Jacques meeting with the agent? Yes. What is going on? Let's find out, he said, moving back from the bushes and coming around toward the walkway. Jacques looked up and caught sight of them coming. Without a moment's hesitation, he pivoted and jumped over the fence into the alleyway. Stop, Jerome shouted, but the man wouldn't stop. Matt stood there like he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. What's going on? That man, Eva said, coming toward him. Why were you talking with him? Him? Matt said, looking back at where Jerome was untangling himself from the bushes he'd almost jumped through himself. He's gone, Jerome said, joining them and turning to Matt. What's going on? What do you mean? He's a tour guide, right? Eva narrowed her eyes at the agent. Tour guide. That's what he told me. Said he could take Mrs. Weston on a private tour without all the cameras. We were discussing price when you came over. Then why did he run? Eva asked, watching him for signs of deception. I don't know. You'll have to ask him. He didn't seem to be lying, but Eva couldn't know for certain. Jerome asked a few more specific questions about what Jacques had said to him, but everything seemed to line up with someone who would want to offer a private tour. Was it for real? It made no sense, but after finding out that Jacques was going to be fine, and with finding no one who had meant to harm him, Jerome had needed to close the case on the poisoning, listing it as accidental. It didn't sit right with either of them, and seeing the man here now also seemed odd. But was it possible he was just someone trying to make a living on the island by offering private tours to celebrities? She'd seen people trying to make money at the Keys before, though she tried to keep them away from her doorstep. Sorry, but if we're done here, I need to get back to my client. How is Mrs. Weston doing? Eva asked. She's not well, he admitted. She saw something last night again, and it's just sent her into a tailspin. She's confused, nauseous, and just overall not doing well. I'm trying to get her to go home, but she isn't sure she can make the flight yet. Has she seen a doctor? Jerome asked. Yes, we had one come here, but, Matt looked around. We think it's more related to her mental health. Eva didn't like the way he said it quietly, as if anyone's mental health was something to be ashamed of. But she caught something else he'd said. We? What do you mean by we, Mr. Jeffers? Oh, He looked around as if the answers might be in the sky somewhere, then shrugged. Just the royal we, I suppose. Eva didn't buy it. Before she could respond, Matt continued. Mary recommended the doctor, and he was very kind. Not much he can do at this point. What about her husband? Eva asked. Surely it was time for him to come and bring his wife home, wasn't it? They are separated at the moment. That's not public knowledge, he said, ducking his head again as if someone might be watching. Then again, as an agent to a movie star, that was likely often the case. I see. Eva hadn't expected that. Rosalie hadn't said anything. Then again, why would she reveal something that personal to her bed and breakfast host? Well, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. Right. Thanks. Matt sidestepped them and headed for the front steps. Eva turned to Jerome. You were quiet. I'm just trying to piece this all together. What's being accomplished right now? Eva considered his question. Rosalie's life is, well, being derailed. Just before a big movie deal. Do you think there are outside forces at work? That someone is trying to discredit her before her next big project? It's a possibility. He rubbed at his jaw. It's odd, though. What is Mary getting out of all this? An exclusive? Eva said, as if it should be obvious. But Rosalie is in no state to be interviewed, is she? Eva hadn't really considered this. Matt even said they were meeting each day, but what could Rosalie be offering the memoir writer in her current state? Perhaps I should talk to Rosalie, without an audience, Eva suggested. As an officer of the law, I can't suggest it. But as a friend, maybe not a bad idea. Eva nodded. I'll check in with the MMBC members tonight and see if anyone has an update for me. Then I'll try to get in to see Rosalie tomorrow. Perhaps while Matt goes out for his morning coffee. I'd say keep me posted, but is that confusing? She rolled her eyes at his attempt at humor. I'm only kidding. Remember? He stepped closer to her, but didn't touch her. At the end of the day, I've clearly stated my intentions. You have? Eva said with a flirtatious smile. Yes, Miss Stewart. You asked for a date, and you'll get one. Is this you asking? No, not yet. And with a last enigmatic smile tossed over his shoulder, Jerome was gone. Chapter 14. The next morning, Eva prepared a tray with tea, honey, lemon, and a plate of cookies left over from the Christmas party. She added a small vase with a sprig of holly she'd used in her decorations, and squaring her shoulders, she headed upstairs. She tried to time her entrance to the second floor when Matt was away for coffee, and when Mary was usually still asleep. She stayed up all hours of the night, and always slept in late, according to Elena, so 9 in the morning seemed to be the best time to find Rosalie alone. Or so Eva hoped. She lightly knocked on the door, aware that Mary was just down the hall, and when a voice called out asking who it was, she said, It's Eva, Mrs. Weston. I have a little morning pick-me-up. The sound of shuffling feet approached the door, and when it opened, Eva had to school her features. The once stunning Rosalie Weston, a movie star in her own right, now looked haggard and in need of a good night's sleep. Hello, Mrs. Weston, Eva said, remembering what she'd prepared to say. I thought I might come in and chat with you over some tea. I guess so. She stepped back, nearly tripping on her bathrobe, and held the door for Eva to come inside. Thanks so much, Eva said, her voice overly chipper. She placed the tea set on the small table and started to clear away some of the papers so they could sit, but then she paused. You've been reading these? She asked. Rosalie looked as if she might burst into tears. They're horrible, and they aren't wrong. She collapsed onto the bed, and Eva came to sit next to her, gingerly putting her arm around the frail woman. "It's all right. Shh," she said, trying to quiet the woman whose sobs were growing loud. "There is no truth in newspapers that leech off the misfortune of others." Rosalie buried her face in her robe and cried for a few more minutes before calming down. "No, they aren't wrong. I just lost the part. The one I was made for." She said it dramatically, and Eva almost thought she was joking, but she caught herself before saying anything. The woman was serious. "It's true," she said, meeting Eva's gaze. "I was made for this part. It was mine from the start. Well, mostly," she faltered, and Eva wasn't sure why. "Do you want some tea?" "I haven't been able to eat much. I don't know. It might be nice for your stomach." The woman nodded, and Eva made her a small cup with lemon and honey. "Here you are." "Thank you," she said, blowing on it. "I'm sorry about all the trouble I've brought to your bed and breakfast. I didn't think this trip would end up like this." Eva picked her words carefully. "Why do you think it has? I mean, with Mr. Banks." Rosalie flinched like Eva had lifted a hand to strike her. "He was an old high school boyfriend," Rosalie finally said. "He was a really nice guy, but we didn't last past high school, and it was awkward to see him." Her answer didn't seem sufficient, and Eva sensed she couldn't push the woman on this. I can't believe he's gone, though. I did love him. Once." "It's hard to lose someone," Eva said, thoughts of her own past flashing before her. She shoved them away and refocused on the second reason she'd come, now that she could see Rosalie was all right, if not ill from lack of food. Though with her pale complexion and the way she'd seemed to waste to nothing within a matter of days, Eva did worry. "Rosalie, I must ask you a question." She needed to word this carefully. "Do you know why Tim might have wanted to harm himself?" Rosalie's head snapped up. "Harm? What?" "The police believe that his death was self-harm." "Absolutely not." Rosalie shook her head back and forth, her cup slipping from her fingers and falling to the floor, spilling what little tea was left. "She did it. She did this. She killed him." Eva's eyes widened. "She? Who's she?" Rosalie looked to the window, the one she knew looked down over the courtyard where she had claimed to see someone. Jessica." Eva blinked. Who was Jessica? And was Rosalie seeing things? Just then the door to her room opened and Mary stood there, but instead of her usual hat and large sunglasses, she even wore them indoors. She had her hair pulled back and little to no makeup on. Rosalie let out a blood-curdling scream and threw herself on the bed. No, it can't be! No!" Eva had no idea what was going on, but when she turned to Mary, the woman had a look of self-satisfaction. What was going on? "Rosalie!" Matt walked in past Mary and looked from her to Eva to Rosalie on the bed. "What is going on?" "She's getting what she deserves," Mary said. Then she spun on her heel and strode out of the room. Eva blinked. There was drama, and then there was real terror, and Rosalie seemed to be truly terrified. "I think you need to leave," Matt said, as if Eva had been the one to hurt Rosalie. Just then her phone buzzed in her pocket. Seeing it was a text from Geraldine, she ducked her head and left the room, Rosalie's sobs carrying to the hall after her. Eva looked around to find Mary, but she was nowhere in sight and her door was closed. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. "Hello?" she said, entering the elevator and hoping the metal wouldn't cut off the signal. "Are you at the bed and breakfast?" It was Vicky's voice, with Elijah in the background asking what Ava's answer was. "Yes, but where? We need to—" The words cut off and then her phone died just as the elevator landed on the bottom floor. Ava was about to dial again, but as the doors opened, she was met with a wall of her friends. What's going on?" she said, looking at their anxious faces. "We have news," Elijah said, looking around as if there might be someone there. "Well, out with it," Ava said. "Not here," Vicky said. Geraldine nodded. "How about outside?" Ava looked to the front window and saw that rain clouds were gathering overhead. The temperature had already dropped, and if her friends didn't want to meet in the main lobby, then the only other place was her cottage. "Let's go to my place." Willard emerged from the kitchen, a plate of snacks in hand, and stopped as they all looked over at him.
"What?"
he said.
"Come on,"
Elijah said, shaking his head in amusement. "We're going to Eva's." Eva turned and saw Jake with his headphones on. He was listening to music and bobbing his head. Being so close to the holidays, they were almost closed down as it was. Anton was scheduled to be off for the rest of the year after breakfast the next day, and she'd told Benita and Elena she would clean the rooms after the guests left so they could have an extended vacation. Jake was only there because she'd wanted to spend time deep cleaning the unused rooms and wanted someone at the front in case her guests needed something. She knew he would remove the earphones should anyone come in, but rather than spend a moment reminding him to do that, she sighed and followed her friends out the back door. "Come on," Geraldine said, practically pulling Eva along. "You're not going to believe what we uncovered." Eva felt the tingling sensation of anticipation in the pit of her stomach. What had her friends discovered? They entered her small space, and Vicky immediately went over and turned on the fireplace. It cozied up the room perfectly, but Eva also turned on the heat just a little, since it was already chilly due to the change in weather. Eva perched near the fire on the elevated hearth, while Geraldine and Willard sat on the couch. Elijah plopped in her recliner, and Vicky grabbed a chair from the dining set. "Will you all spit it out?" she said, anxiously looking between them. "Or wait, should I call Jerome?" Only then did she realize she'd left her phone at the desk.
"Why don't you hear us out first?" Willard said. "Then you can call Jerome."
"Well?" she prompted.
"I dug into the high school records," Elijah began, giving the group members a glance before continuing. "They all went to the same high school."
"All," Eva said.
"Rosalie Weston, Tim Banks, and—"
He pulled out a few scraps of paper, and Eva realized some were paint sample cards.
"A guy named Jack Levin."
"Did you say Levin?"
"Yeah."
Elijah's excitement was palpable.
"You mentioned the name of that Albert guy was Levin, right?"
"Yes," she said, surprised he'd remembered.
"It came to me when I was looking over the class list. But get this, Levin had 2 sisters, Janessa and Jessica."
"Did you say Jessica?" Eva said, her eyes growing wide.
"Yeah, but
Rosalie was mentioning something about that," Eva said, more to herself than the group. "But what would it have to do with high school?"
I found these articles," Elijah said, passing them to Eva.
She started reading when Geraldine's phone rang.
"Hello?" Geraldine said. "Hey, Pete."
She covered the phone and spoke to them.
"Sorry, asked him to call with his update. Let me put you on speaker, Pete."
She pressed the button, and his slightly muffled voice came out loudly from her phone.
"Hey, guys, sorry to report with bad news. Or really, I guess it's just no news. The agent checks out. Called his office, and they say he's a great guy, though he is under a bit of stress with the media attention. At least that's what the receptionist said."
Eva nodded, before remembering Pete couldn't see her. "Thanks, Pete. I think that's all we need for now."
"You got it."
The sound of dogs barking in the background drowned him out.
"Gotta go."
Eva was starting to see something. But what was it? Then she met Willard's gaze. "Did you get something on Mary?" Surely there was more scoop, otherwise they wouldn't have come here in such a rush.
"I did."
"We did," Geraldine corrected.
"Right. So we looked into her publishing contacts, and from what everyone knows, she is not working a story right now."
"As in, they don't think she's writing Rosalie's story, or they don't know because she hasn't told them yet?"
"No, she's not at all."
Geraldine took over for Willard. "Turns out she's having carpal tunnel surgery. Too much typing." Eva blinked. If she was having surgery, then who—
"I think it's about time we wrap this little party up,"
a voice said from the doorway. There, shadowed by dim gray light, stood Mary, or the woman pretending to be her, and she held a gun on them all. Chapter 15. Eva felt panic rise in her throat and saw Geraldine move her hand over her phone.
"I wouldn't,"
the fake Mary said, moving her aim toward Geraldine.
"Everyone phones on the table where I can see 'em."
Geraldine put hers down, followed by Elijah and Vicky, but Willard held up his hands.
"I don't care, everyone."
The woman's eyes narrowed.
"Then keep your hands where I can see 'em, or else I might accidentally pull the trigger."
Only then did Eva notice the silencer on the end of the woman's gun. She'd thought the merry imposter wouldn't dare shoot a gun in broad daylight, but no one would hear if the gun was silenced. Now. She moved aside, and Rosalie stepped into the doorway, a dark shape behind her. She stumbled forward when the shape pushed her. "Why are you doing this, Jessica?" Rosalie said. "Shut up," the woman said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll make it right, just let me." The woman took a step toward her, leveling the gun at her as the dark shape entered the room, and Eva saw that it was actually Jacques Aubert, or Jack Levin. He too had a gun, and he looked around nervously like he didn't want to be there. "Please," Eva said, holding up her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "We can resolve this, whatever the issue is." "The issue? The issue is her and what she did." Jessica's dead, or don't you remember?" "Twins." The word slipped out before Eva could stop it, and the woman's gaze snapped to her. "What did you say?" "I'm guessing you and... was it Janessa? You were twins." "You really are some sort of detective, aren't you? Did you figure out Jack's my brother?" Suddenly, all the pieces started falling into place for Eva. "You all went to high school together," she began, looking between Janessa and her brother Jack. "That was the year Rosalie was chosen for the role that changed her life." "You mean the year she stole it?" Eva was seeing more clearly. "What else did she steal, Janessa?" "She stole Tim, and then she stole her life." Janessa's cheeks turned a violent shade of red, and Jack rested a hand on her shoulder. She shook it off. "No, let me tell you how it all went down." Janessa turned wild eyes on them. "She stole my sister's boyfriend right out from under her the day she stole Jessica's audition spot. She ruined my sister's life in less than 24 hours, and then Jessica just..." Janessa couldn't say it. "She killed herself," Jack finished. He'd lowered the gun to his side, and Eva saw an opportunity there. He didn't look to have the same fierce determination his sister did. Could they play that to their advantage? If only she'd thought to call Jerome. Her gaze slipped to where Willard sat, and only then did she notice the phone next to his leg, his thumb working on the screen. If she could keep them talking, maybe it would buy them enough time. "So you set out to ruin Rosalie's life." Eva looked over at the broken woman. "I'm guessing you drugged her food?" Janessa's eyes flashed in anger. "We shared lunch. It was easy enough." "Is that how you poisoned your brother?" Jack's eyes widened in surprise, but Janessa merely turned a cold gaze Eva's way. He had to see that I was serious, that I could get to him no matter what. I told him the whole plan, but he was a chicken. Eva saw it clearly now. She'd brought her brother back from France to Maryland, where they'd grown up, where Tim was from, and hatched a whole plan to completely discredit Rosalie Weston's life right before a big career move, just like the one she'd stolen from their sister. But it was clear there was more at play here. Perhaps mental illness that wasn't about Rosalie, but Janessa. She had a manic look to her that was more wild determination than cold calculation. "So what's the plan now, Janessa?" Eva said, standing. "Are you going to kill us all just to seek your revenge on this woman? She's broken, and her career is over already. What more do you want?" "I want her life," Janessa said, taking a step forward. It didn't escape Eva's notice that Jack hadn't moved. "And what about you, Jack? Are you going to seek revenge through bloodshed?" He flinched at the word blood. "Don't talk to him," Janessa said. Eva caught sight of movement out the wide window behind Janessa and Jack. If she had to guess, she'd say it was Jerome, but was that just wishful thinking? I don't want to, Nessa. Please don't make me." He dropped the gun then. The heavy thud echoed in the silence when it hit the ground. "You're a coward. I should have done this years ago, but I couldn't." She stopped herself, shaking her head and flinching like someone was trying to get her attention. That's when Eva saw Jerome at the thin window next to her door. He held up 3 fingers. She took a step closer to Janessa and his eyes widened, but she held his stare intently for another moment before taking yet another step toward the woman. "You've done a good job, Janessa," she said in her most soothing voice. "You've repaid your sister for the terrible things that happened. Now it's time to rest. I can't. Janessa looked confused and the gun dropped a foot lower. That's when Eva saw Jerome's fingers move. 3, 2, 1. Eva lunged forward and knocked Janessa's arm away, hitting her wrist so hard she dropped the gun just as officers burst through her front door. Freeze! Police! Eva nursed a cup of herbal tea with a blanket over her shoulders as Jerome finished talking with another officer before he led Janessa and Jack away. Rosalie was being checked out by a real doctor, Matt at her side as always. Soon Rosalie would make a trip to the hospital to wash away whatever drugs Janessa had used to trick her into thinking she was losing her mind. Hey there, Jerome said, his weight pulling him down into the love seat next to her. His shoulder was solid and warm next to hers, and she almost gave in to the desire to lean against him. Hey, she said, her throat still dry despite the tea. You were stupidly brave back there. She sent him a glance. Well, it's true. I didn't want her being startled by everyone bursting into the room. She was the one with a gun in her hands, aimed our way, you know. She caught his grin and offered one of her own. Okay, he admitted, but only because it worked out in the end. You need to be more careful. Add self-defense training to your list of things to do. Are you legally able to add things onto my list for becoming a private investigator? He grinned. No, but I can insist on having you trained. Maybe even do the training myself. She rolled her eyes but didn't debate him. In fact, having defense training would be helpful if they ever came into another situation like that again, which would hopefully never be the case. So you got the whole story, right? Janessa Levin, twin sister to Jessica, who committed suicide back in high school after missing her one big chance to break into the movies. Yeah, Eva agreed. Janessa never forgave Rosalie, but I think it was more. A lot more, he agreed. Janessa's been in a home for the mentally unstable since her early 20s. She was released as stable, but that was clearly a mistake. Revenge is a scary thing. And a driving force, that's for sure. She did as you said, poisoned her brother to show him that she could, and forced him to be her helper. And Tim? It was all part of her plan. He shook his head. Revenge for dumping her sister and dating Rosalie. She planned to have the food delivered to him, and then had her brother take him the food, laced with drugs. So Jack's an accessory. Definitely. They leaned back as one, snuggling into the seat. Eva almost tried to move away, but feeling the exhaustion and the stress from the day, she decided to forego what was proper for what made her feel happy, and that was sitting close to Jerome. I guess now isn't the time to say Merry Almost Christmas. She chuckled, shaking her head. I think her plan was horrible, but why here? Why during our holiday season? Eva shook her head. It's hard to know why, but I did talk with Jack a little. He said they'd taken only one vacation as a family as kids, and... Let me guess. It was to Key West. Exactly. Out of all the places they could have stayed. Jerome chuckled. Luck of the draw. She rolled her eyes. Hey, so Christmas Eve. He trailed off and she turned to look at him. What? Would you like to have dinner with me? Why, detective, are you asking a witness on a date? His grin deepened. I most certainly am, but I'd call you a fellow investigator rather than a witness. She pressed her lips together, curbing her smile before asking, I thought you were going to New York to see family. He shrugged. They can wait until Christmas Day. That is, if I have a reason to stay. She tilted her head, considering his handsome features. Behind him, Christmas lights twinkled in the fading light of the afternoon. Down the street, she heard the strains of the Christmas song. The feeling of the season had been suppressed by the business, something Eva always tried not to let happen. But now, the contented happiness of Christmas was slipping in. With Rosalie getting help, Tim's unfortunate passing understood, and Jack's poisoning solved, Eva felt ready to face the holidays with nothing but cheer and goodwill. And perhaps a handsome detective. You know what? She allowed her smile free rein. I think you'll have a very good reason to stay. This